General en su 78º periodo de sesiones. También decidió que el grupo de trabajo de composición abierta trabajara sobre la base del consenso, celebrará su sesión de organización en Ginebra durante 2 días y se reunirá en Ginebra en 2 sesiones de 5 días cada una en 2022 y 2023. En la sesión organizacional que tuvo lugar en Ginebra el 7 y 9 de febrero pasados, el grupo decidió postergar las fechas de la primera sesión sustantiva del grupo para el 9 al 13 de mayo. Estas fechas estaban destinadas originalmente para la segunda sesión, por lo que esta enmienda tiene implicancias para el calendario. Esta modificación y la tarea de encontrar salas disponibles en Ginebra obligaron al presidente, en conjunto con la Secretaría, a evaluar las mejores fechas disponibles para las 4 sesiones. Como resultado de esta evaluación, el presidente resolvió presentar una propuesta consolidada de calendario para las 4 sesiones. Este ejercicio no ha sido fácil, ya que hay muchas reuniones y conferencias diferentes en Ginebra este año y también en otras sedes. Por lo tanto, señor presidente, no existen fechas perfectas que no coincidan en absoluto con alguna otra reunión multilateral. Pero esta propuesta se ha elaborado con la intención de minimizar esas eventuales superposiciones y además considerando suficiente espacio de tiempo entre las sesiones a fin de facilitar la preparación previa de las delegaciones. Con estas consideraciones, Chile ha presentado el proyecto de decisión que tienen ante ustedes y será considerado esta mañana por la Asamblea General. Por lo tanto, formulamos un llamado a todas las delegaciones que han expresado su apoyo a este proceso para que nos ayuden a adoptar esta decisión por consenso, la cual constituye un paso muy importante para iniciar nuestros debates significativos en la primera sesión del 9 al 13 de mayo en Ginebra y así cumplir el mandato que hemos recibido. Se trata de una medida de tipo procedimental, no controversial, que recoge las inquietudes de las delegaciones en la sesión organizacional de febrero y también expresada durante las consultas que ha realizado el presidente del grupo. Confiamos que el objetivo común que nos une, que es mejorar la seguridad y sostenibilidad de los sistemas espaciales en beneficio de la preservación de la paz y del bienestar de todos, se vea reflejado en la adopción de este proyecto de decisión. Muchas gracias.
I thank the distinguished representative of Chile. The Assembly will now take action on draft decision A/76/L50 entitled Open-Ended Working Group on Reducing Space Threats Through Norms, Rules, and Principles of Responsible Behaviors. May I take it that it is the wish of the General Assembly to adopt draft decision A/76/L50. It is so decided. May I take it that it is the wish of the General Assembly to conclude its consideration of sub-item D of Agenda Item 98. It is so decided. The General Assembly will resume its consideration of Agenda Item 124 entitled Strengthening of the United Nations System to take action on draft resolution issued as document A/76/L52. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Liechtenstein to introduce draft resolution A/76/L52.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, I have the honor to introduce on behalf of the co-sponsors draft resolution L52 entitled Standing Mandate for a General Assembly Debate when a Veto is Cast in the Security Council. I am happy to inform this Assembly that this initiative is currently supported by 76 co-sponsors from all regional groups. The draft resolution before this Assembly today creates a standing mandate for the Assembly to be convened automatically within 10 working days every time a veto has been cast in the Security Council. This resolution, which will take immediate effect, also accords precedence to the delegation or delegations that have cast the veto on an exceptional basis in the list of speakers of the subsequent General Assembly debate. This mandate, which is without prejudice to ongoing discussions in the intergovernmental negotiations IGN, carried out pursuant to GA Resolution 62/557, is not prescriptive with respect to a possible outcome. While states can of course propose action by the GA in accordance with established procedures of the Assembly, that will not necessarily be so. Mr. President, Liechtenstein started work on this initiative together with a core group of states over 2 years ago out of a growing concern that the Security Council has found it increasingly difficult to carry out its work in accordance with its mandate under the UN Charter, of which the increase in the use of the veto is but the most obvious expression. All member states of this organization have conferred on the Security Council primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, and agreed that the Council acts on their behalf. We are therefore of the view that the membership as a whole should be given a voice when the Security Council is unable to act in accordance with this Assembly's functions and powers, reflected in the Charter of the United Nations, in particular its Article 10. The veto power comes with the responsibility to work for the achievement of the purposes and principles of the UN Charter at all times. We have put this text forward as an expression of our commitment to multilateralism, with this organization and its principal organs at the forefront. There has never been a stronger need for effective multilateralism than today. And there has never been a stronger need for innovation in order to secure the central role and voice of the United Nations in this respect. Mr. President, we have done extensive outreach and consultations, both individually as well as collectively with our core group and co-sponsors, in bilateral and various group settings. Our text was first circulated to the UN membership as a whole on March the 3rd, first made available to a wider public on April the 12th, and discussed in an open format with all interested states on April the 19th. We are grateful for the strong interest from members of this Assembly and the numerous comments we have received from many of you in the course of this lengthy process. They have helped us refine and improve our text, resulting in the straightforward, legally sound and politically meaningful proposal we present to you today. We are very thankful for the very strong support our initiative has received from the membership, and we look forward to adopting it together with you this morning. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Liechtenstein. We shall now proceed to consider draft resolution A/76/L52. Before giving the floor for explanations of vote before the vote, may I remind delegations that explanations of vote are limited to 10 minutes and should be made by delegations from their seats. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Gabon.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President,
nous nous réunissons aujourd'hui pour envisager les perspectives de convenir d'un meilleur usage du droit de veto reconnu aux membres permanents du Conseil de sécurité depuis la fin de la Deuxième Guerre mondiale. Une époque bien lointaine où les problèmes et les espérances de l'humanité n'étaient pas les mêmes qu'aujourd'hui. Si nous en sommes là, à la lisière de l'insoutenable pour la plupart des peuples du monde, c'est parce que le droit de veto est manifestement critiquable, aussi bien sur le terrain de l'efficacité que sur celui de la représentativité. Il est clair qu'il constitue une entrave à la capacité de décision du Conseil de sécurité qui ne peut intervenir dès lors que son action ne convient pas à un des membres permanents, quelle que soit la gravité de la menace à la paix ou de l'atteinte à la sécurité internationale. Cette prérogative exorbitante, utilisée 295 fois de 1946 à ce jour, tour à tour par chacun des membres permanents du Conseil de sécurité, a souvent entraîné la paralysie d'une organisation censée promouvoir la paix et la sécurité internationale et a débouché sur son impuissance à agir là même où l'action collective s'est souvent avérée indispensable. Le droit de veto tend à faire du Conseil de sécurité l'instrument de domination de quelques-uns et dont les intérêts particuliers prévalent sur l'intérêt collectif de l'ensemble de la communauté internationale. En dépit de ces évidences, certains retorquent que le Conseil de sécurité n'est pas détruit par le veto, mais qu'il est sauvé par lui. Pour ces derniers, le veto devrait donc être considéré et accepté comme un mal nécessaire. Quoi qu'il en soit, au-delà de nos perceptions, au-delà des appels incessants à une réforme du Conseil de sécurité, ou encore des aspirations d'une grande majorité des peuples du monde pour l'avènement d'un ordre international plus juste, plus démocratique et plus en phase avec les réalités actuelles, une autre réalité implacable s'impose à nous, celle d'un droit de veto solidement verrouillé par la Charte des Nations Unies, qui ne pourrait valablement être remis en cause que si les 2/3 des membres de l'Assemblée Générale donnaient leur accord formel, et surtout si de surcroît les 5 membres permanents du Conseil de sécurité acceptaient unanimement de renoncer à ce privilège. Autant dire qu'il s'agit d'une hypothèse dont la matérialisation semble relever de l'alignement des planètes. Monsieur le Président, il est évident que nous avons besoin d'un véritable changement de paradigme si nous voulons donner au Conseil de sécurité un visage plus humain et plus en phase avec sa vocation. Il s'agit de reconfigurer sa composition, ses pouvoirs et ses méthodes de travail, soit en augmentant le nombre de ses membres, aussi bien permanents que non permanents, avec le risque d'amplifier les abus liés à l'utilisation du droit de veto, soit tout simplement en abolissant purement et simplement le droit de veto. Naturellement, dans chacune de ces perspectives, l'Afrique, le continent qui accueille le plus grand nombre de missions de maintien de la paix, devra prendre la place qui lui est due conformément au consensus des îles Unies et à la déclaration de Sirte. Au demeurant, rappelons-le, ces perspectives judicieuses de reconfiguration de la gouvernance internationale ne peuvent prospérer que si elles sont validées par chacun des membres permanents du Conseil de sécurité, selon les dispositions actuelles de la Charte, en espérant, bien entendu, que ces derniers soient disposés à partager ou à être amputés de leurs acquis stratégiques. Monsieur le Président, soyons réalistes et pragmatiques. Il est indéniable que les décisions de cette organisation sont le reflet de l'état actuel du consensus mondial, ou plus exactement de l'absence de consensus sur les problèmes fondamentaux. Dans la mesure où même face à des menaces abjectes telles que le terrorisme, nous peinons à nous accorder sur une définition. Et chaque nation demeure centrée sur ses préoccupations tout en ne déployant son agenda international qu'en fonction de ses seuls intérêts nationaux. Dans cette dynamique, la solidarité internationale résonne comme un slogan pieux et l'ordre mondial fondé sur les règles se trouve anesthésié par l'expansion de la loi du plus fort sous l'effet des enjeux géostratégiques, géoéconomiques et géopolitiques. Monsieur le Président, En choisissant de statuer aujourd'hui sur l'épineuse question du droit de veto des membres permanents du Conseil de sécurité sous l'angle exclusif de la rhétorique, nous actons avec impuissance que nos efforts de réformer cet organe, cet important organe de l'ONU, sont sans issue et expédions de facto au calendrier grec toute perspective d'aboutissement du processus intergouvernemental de négociation amorcé sur cette question. Face à cet implacable constat, notre conviction est que le vote d'une résolution sur l'usage du droit de veto ne changera ni la portée du droit de veto, ni sa substance, ni ses effets. Ce que nous faisons aujourd'hui exhale le reflet d'une société qui enrobe une tumeur mortifiante pour son vivre ensemble d'un sparadrap de résignation. Nous savons tous que dans l'état actuel de la Charte des Nations Unies, une résolution de l'Assemblée Générale n'aura manifestement rien de dissuasif pour les détenteurs du droit de veto. Et par conséquent, elle ne pourra arrêter aucune guerre, ni résoudre la moindre crise qui soit à la remorque de l'usage du droit de veto. En revanche, il est à redouter que le seul schéma qui pourrait résulter du vote d'aujourd'hui soit une fois de plus le terrible spectacle d'une communauté internationale divisée et en querelle au moment fatidique où les peuples du monde attendent un sursaut d'unité et une lueur d'espoir à la mesure de leur détresse. Monsieur le Président, dans quelques instants, selon que l'on votera oui ou non, on s'alignera mécaniquement dans un camp dressé contre un autre. Devant un tel schéma d'étroitesse d'options, nous pouvons encore percevoir l'écho des paroles empreintes de sagesse de l'ancien Premier ministre de Barbade, son Excellence Errol Barrow, qui a pu en son temps se réclamer ami de tous et satellite de personnes. C'est certainement le reflet des Nations Unies dont rêvent les peuples du monde, une organisation où chaque nation est amie de tous. Le refus d'alignement dans les carcans des sphères d'influence qui a sédimenté le mouvement des non-alignés doit retrouver toute son actualité au risque d'exhumer les vestiges d'un ordre mondial de blocs antagonistes et des murs de séparation, plutôt que d'ensemencer un ordre mondial fondé sur la construction des passerelles entre les peuples du monde. Parce que nous ne voulons pas créditer cette logique de camp et d'invective et de fragmentation aux antipodes du monde que nous voulons, mon pays s'abstiendra lors du vote du projet de résolution à l'examen. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
I thank the distinguished representative of Gabon, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Guyana.
Mr. President, my delegation takes the floor to support draft resolution A/76/L52, entitled Standing Mandate for a General Assembly Debate when a Veto is Cast in the Security Council. Guyana is extremely pleased to be among those supporting this progressive step that we are taking today as member states of the United Nations, and commends the delegation of Liechtenstein for its leadership in tabling this resolution. While acknowledging that this resolution is without prejudice to the intergovernmental negotiations on reform of the Security Council, I must acknowledge that the question of the veto continues to be the subject of much deliberation, principally in the IGN. It continues to occupy our attention primarily because of what its use often means for the maintenance of international peace and security, a responsibility which has been conferred primarily on the Security Council by the member states of the United Nations, on whose behalf the Council acts. On this latter note, and underscoring the constructive approach required on any issue included on the Council's agenda, my delegation is of the firm conviction that this draft resolution aims to add a critical element to the work that we do as an organization for the maintenance of international peace and security. Mr. President, Guyana has long been among those advocating for the abolition of the veto. Our position is premised, inter alia, on the view that the veto does not contribute to accountability by those council members who may exercise its use, and sometimes enables situations where these council members can prevent the council from taking action in situations that require strong responses from the UN. Such situations include humanitarian crises fueled by violent conflict, including war. They also include violations of the principles of the UN Charter and international law, such as the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity and political independence of another state. Further, they include violations of international disarmament obligations, such as the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons and the use of weapons of mass destruction, such as chemical weapons. In this context, and to build a culture of accountability and transparency around the use of the veto, the proposal to organize a debate in the most representative organ of the UN, the General Assembly, is both appropriate and necessary. In this way, formal scope is provided for deliberations among the entire UN membership, including the Council member casting the veto, in situations where the latter has chosen to prevent Council action on a matter deemed important to the maintenance of international peace and security. Guyana believes that by broadening the deliberations on such issues outside of the Council, all member states will be provided the opportunity to contribute to the search for solutions. In our assessment, this will also serve to strengthen the relationship between the General Assembly and the Security Council, bearing in mind that the General Assembly also plays a role in the maintenance of international peace and security. Mr. President, allow me to conclude by underscoring that the use of the veto should not be viewed as a right, but as a prerogative which can be exercised by some Council members. Considering the mandate of the Security Council, the prerogative to use the veto is a heavy responsibility which should not be taken lightly. Its use can mean the difference between war and peace, life and death, development and poverty. My delegation hopes that what is achieved by this resolution today, once adopted, will be a critical step towards a rethink of the use of the veto. I therefore urge all member states to support the consensus adoption of this resolution as an expression of our common responsibility to build a peaceful world. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Guyana, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Philippines.
Mr. President, the Philippines finds merit in the draft GA Resolution L52 in its intention to make a meaningful contribution to strengthening the role of the General Assembly and enhancing the accountability of the Security Council to the general membership as provided for under the UN Charter. This view of strengthening the General Assembly by enhancing its ability to act on matters affecting international peace and security in the event the Security Council is unable to do so for whatever reason has long been espoused by the Philippines. The thrust of the resolution is in line with the Philippine position on the question of the veto and in strengthening the General Assembly by exercising its role and authority as stated in the Charter on questions related to international peace and security in accordance with Articles 10 to 14 and 35. However, the Philippines will abstain from draft resolution L52 in view of the following three key points. First, OP1 renders the convening process automatic as it mandates the President of the General Assembly to convene a formal meeting of the Assembly within 10 working days of the casting of the veto. One existing mechanism, such as the emergency special session under Resolution 377AV, Uniting for Peace, respects the power of the General Assembly to decide whether or not to convene and make recommendations to the members of the United Nations or to the Security Council, or to both, on any such questions or matters, except as provided in Article 12. We note that Article 12 of the UN Charter empowers the Secretary General, with the consent of the Security Council, to notify the General Assembly of any matters relative to the maintenance of international peace and security, in which case, immediately the Security Council ceases to deal with such matters. Second, we wish to emphasize that it should be the member states of the General Assembly that decide on whether to have a debate and initiate the proceedings, not the PGA. Such a decision should be arrived at after the PGA undertakes consultations with a wider membership. OP1 places the responsibility in the President, but not in the General Assembly or its members itself. In effect, it reduces the power of the member states. Third, the automaticity of convening a General Assembly debate every single time the veto is exercised in the Security Council may prove impractical and inefficient. The existing system is not infirm and has worked quite well over the years. Since 1946, a total of 293 vetoes have been cast in the UNSC, covering a number of issues. Not all resolutions vetoed in the Council required Assembly action. The context within which the veto was exercised should be a major consideration on whether a GA debate should be conducted on it. The holding of a formal GA debate should be on a case-by-case basis after the member states have given the matter careful consideration. We have seen cases, including recent ones, where the proponents of SC resolutions that failed to pass because of the veto had brought the same resolutions to the GA for consideration. Decisions to hold a GA meeting or an emergency special session had been made following GA rules of procedure and practice. The Philippines consistently supports the view that the General Assembly is the chief deliberative, policymaking, and most representative organ of the United Nations. However, while we aim to strengthen the role of the General Assembly and enhance the accountability of the Security Council on matters concerning international peace and security, it is important that the collective and inclusive authority of the member states is upheld at all times. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Philippines, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Brazil.
Thank you. Mr. President, although my delegation sees merit in the general idea that the permanent members of the Security Council should clarify to the wider membership their positions on peace and security matters, Brazil is going to abstain in case of vote for draft resolution L52. We believe this draft resolution was not properly discussed. We regret the proponents did not engage in negotiations nor organized informal consultations to give member states the opportunity to make contributions to the text. Had such a debate taken place, we should have proposed, for example, that similar mechanism be considered whenever a mandate for the use of force is determined by the Security Council. This would promote wider transparency and accountability. More importantly, the draft resolution before us changes the delicate balance between the Security Council and the General Assembly, creating a standing mandate for the GA to debate an item every time a veto is cast puts in question its authority and legitimacy. This would also discourage efforts by Council members to finding common ground when divisive situations arise. We have also to remind ourselves that in itself, a veto is not a failure to maintain peace and security. It has been embedded in the Charter as a means to contain excess of power and safeguard the international system against decisions to use the force taken by one country or group of countries. We have seen it happen, even without this resolution, and we should avoid weakening the system further. Mr. President, the Uniting for Peace mechanism was adopted exceptionally, respond to situations in which the Security Council fails to exercise its primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. It was officially enacted only 11 times in more than 70 years. This is not without reason. It means that the General Assembly has been urged to act only in extreme or exceptional circumstances. It should remain so. Although this draft genuinely tries to find alternatives to the Security Council paralysis, it is not the appropriate answer to the challenge, and it has not been discussed as it should. The authority and effectiveness of the Council will only be regained when this very Assembly decides to move forward in the protracted discussions on the reform. A representative Council which reflects the current international system is central to the maintenance of peace and security and to the future of this organization. As a founding member of this organization and as a current member of the Security Council, Brazil renews its commitment to continue working for negotiated solutions to threats to peace and security and for an effective United Nations. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Brazil, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Nicaragua.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much,
señor presidente.
Mr. President.
Este es el momento
This is the time
que frente a todas estas maniobras que apuntan a la desintegración de las Naciones Unidas de parte de Estados Unidos y los países occidentales, es importante decir lo siguiente. Nicaragua denuncia las maniobras violatorias de la intención y los propósitos que deben regir Naciones Unidas y urge, ahora más que nunca, la refundación de Naciones Unidas, como propuso sabiamente en su momento, en nombre de Nicaragua, el expresidente de esta Asamblea General, Padre Miguel de Escoto Brockman. Nuestra única propuesta es iniciar de inmediato el proceso de refundación de Naciones Unidas. Estas maniobras del imperialismo norteamericano y los países occidentales es para intentar ejercer hegemonía total. Nicaragua exige que las resoluciones y decisiones soberanas de la Asamblea General se cumplan, como en el caso del bloqueo contra Cuba. ¿Y tantas veces se ha votado para poner fin a este bloqueo? Y se desconocen las decisiones de esta soberana Asamblea General. Igualmente, Nicaragua denuncia a los Estados Unidos que han desconocido los fallos de la Corte Internacional de Justicia, que los mandata a indemnizar a Nicaragua, mandato que desconocen, descalificando así a las Naciones Unidas y al más alto tribunal internacional. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
I thank the distinguished representative of Nicaragua. We have heard the last speaker in explanation of vote before the vote. Before proceeding to take a decision on draft resolution A/76/L52, I wish to address the question concerning the majority required for the adoption of the draft resolution. In light of Article 18, paragraphs 2 and 3 of the Charter of the United Nations, is there any objection to taking action on draft resolution A/76/L52 by a simple majority of the members present and voting? I see no objection. The simple majority of members present and voting is therefore required for the adoption of draft resolution A/76/L52. The Assembly will now take a decision on draft resolution A/76/L52 entitled Standing Mandate for a General Assembly Debate when a veto is cast in the Security Council. For your information, the draft resolution has been closed for e-sponsorship. I now give the floor to the representative of the Secretariat.
Thank you, Mr. President. I should like to announce that since the submission of the draft resolution, and in addition to the delegations listed on the L document, the following countries have also become co-sponsors of A/76/L52: Andorra, Bahamas, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Cabo Verde, Cyprus, Djibouti, France, Gambia, Greece, Hungary, Italy, Jamaica, Libya, Maldives, Marshall Islands, the Federated States of Micronesia, Panama, San Marino, and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. If any other countries wish to co-sponsor A/76/L52, please signify by pressing the microphone button now. I see Monaco, Morocco, the State of Palestine, South Sudan, Uruguay, that's it, thank you, Tonga, Timor-Leste, Mauritania, that's it. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Secretariat. In the absence of a request for a recorded vote, may I take it that it is the wish of the General Assembly to adopt the draft resolution A/76/L52. It is so decided. Before giving the floor for explanations of vote after the vote, may I remind delegations that explanations of vote are limited to 10 minutes and should be made by delegations from their seats. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of China.
当今世界正面临前所未有的风险和挑战，各国需要坚持真正的多边主义，在联合国旗帜下加强团结合作，让联合国成为维护共同安全、谋求共同发展的核心平台。中国和其他会员国一样，认为联合国大会是整个联合国系统内最具普遍性、代表性的政策审议和决策机构，支持联合国大会根据联合国宪章授权履行职责，发挥积极和重要作用。列支敦士登等国在加强联合国系统议程项目下提交决议，表示旨在让联大能够按照联合国宪章授权，在事关国际和平与安全问题上发挥作用，为有效的多边主义做贡献。基于我们对联合国大会作用的一贯立场，我们能够理解并认同这项决议的出发点。联合国宪章把维持国际和平与安全的主要职责授予安理会。中国始终本着建设性、负责任的态度参与安理会工作，主张安理会应致力于和平解决争端、推动对话协商化解分歧，同联大、经社理事会、国际法院和有关区域组织在履行各自职权基础上加强协调。我们一直积极推动安理会改进工作方法，增强透明度。 扩大安理会成员，特别是中小国家的参与。当今世界充满不确定性和不稳定性，国际社会期待常任理事国做出表率，带头支持多边主义，带头遵守国际法治，带头履行国际义务，带头推动全球合作。联合国宪章第27条第3款确定了安理会常任理事国的特殊责任，常任理事国之间要相互体现尊重，反映国际社会共同的安全需要，更要坚持国家不分大小，一律平等。中方积极倡导共同综合合作可持续的安全观，始终以实际行动认真履行国际责任与义务，一向本着对联合国宪章负责、对历史负责的态度，确定我们在安理会的立场。对于常任理事国意见不一致，导致安理会在事关和平与安全的重大问题上不能采取行动的情况，我们赞成会员国在联合国大会平台上进行讨论，联合一致共策和平机制提供了就此举行联大紧急特别会议的安排。多年来的实践表明，这项安排可以让会员国在事关国际和平与安全的重大问题上发挥作用。同时，在安理会实际工作中，安理会不能采取行动的具体情形多种多样。本次会议通过的决议赋予联大新的授权，意味着建立一种自动触发联大召开会议的机制。这在实践中很可能引发程序上的困惑和混淆。目前难以确定这样的安排能否达到决议的预期目的。主席先生，推动联大和安理会切实履行联合国宪章赋予的职责，有利于加强联合国系统的有效性，有利于把联合国宪章宗旨和原则落到实处，符合国际社会共同利益。中方愿同广大会员国一道，继续为此做出不懈努力。谢谢主席先生。
I thank the distinguished representative of China, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of India.
Thank you, Mr. President. Representing a delegation that has piloted the need for reformed multilateralism, India fully supports any initiative that genuinely furthers the objective of achieving meaningful and comprehensive reform of the key elements of the global multilateral architecture. In the context of the United Nations, this has inter alia implied bringing the structure and composition of the Security Council in line with contemporary geopolitical realities through its comprehensive reforms across the 5 clusters of categories of membership. That is question of veto, regional representation, size of an enlarged Security Council, improving its working methods, and improving the Council's relationship with General Assembly. Our leaders have repeatedly tasked us with delivering early and comprehensive reform of the Security Council, a task which over the years of textless, fruitless deliberations in the IGN remains not only unfulfilled, but blocked by those perpetuating the outdated status quo. In effect, a vocal minority of naysayers have held the entire process of Security Council reform hostage over the last 4 decades. The only way to begin to remedy what ails the Security Council is to make it more representative, credible, and legitimate by including more underrepresented voices, including from developing countries and from Africa. My delegation has the following 5 issues of concern on the present initiative. First, This very UN General Assembly had unanimously agreed via decision 62-557 in 2008 that all 5 aspects of UN Security Council reform, including on the question of veto, would be decided in a comprehensive manner, and therefore no single cluster could be addressed in isolation. When a group of pro-reform member states, including India, had moved a similar such initiative nearly a decade ago, which also called for an improvement in the working methods of the Council, we were accused of promoting a piecemeal approach to UN Security Council reform. It is therefore ironical that the same set of member states who argue vociferously against piecemeal reform in the IGN are today themselves supporting a piecemeal initiative which ignores the root cause of the problem. We therefore hope that other piecemeal efforts focusing on aspects of category of membership and working methods of the Council would be treated without any double standards and with a similar yardstick in the future. Second, all 5 permanent members have used the veto over the last 75 years to achieve their respective political ends. In this regard, let me flag what our African brothers and sisters have repeatedly stated in the IGN. I quote, "The veto as a matter of principle should be abolished. However, as a matter of common justice, it should be extended to new permanent members so long as it continues to exist," unquote. The privilege of using the veto has been vested to only 5 member states. The UN General Assembly can do very little about it, as effectively the P5 have a veto over the veto. As rightly called out by our African brothers and sisters, it goes against the concept of sovereign equality of states and only perpetuates the mindset of the Second World War. To the victor belongs the spoils. Either all nations are treated equally in the context of voting rights, or else the new permanent members must also be given the veto. By bringing veto to the General Assembly as a standalone issue on which the remaining membership has no de facto say, and by implying that this issue needs to be addressed first, above all other substantive issues of UN Security Council reform, is giving disproportionate importance to one issue over all others. This flawed approach is therefore an aberration. Third, the provisions of this resolution also tend to relitigate the provisions of the UN Charter, as they entail structural changes in the relationship between the UN General Assembly and the Security Council. These will impact the internal decision-making dynamics of the Council. Fourth, the proponents of the resolution claim that automaticity of the standing mandate is meant to empower the General Assembly. Mr. President, we fail to understand how can removing the discretion and decision-making ability of the President of the General Assembly and the membership empower the General Assembly. There are already mechanisms in place which enable the membership of the General Assembly to decide on an emergency basis to convene discussions or even take action on issues that reach stalemate in the Security Council. We need not add an automatic invocation of another mechanism by rewriting the existing rules. The wider implications of today's decision bring us to our final and 5th point. A substantive and important resolution such as this, with profound long-term ramifications on the relationship between 2 major organs of the UN, their mandates, and internal working dynamics, demand much more serious, in-depth, and inclusive deliberation than was allowed by the movers of this text. We regret the lack of inclusivity in the manner this resolution was put forth. We have serious concerns about such take-it-or-leave-it initiatives which do not make a genuine effort to take into account the perspectives and concerns of the wider membership. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of India, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Indonesia.
Mr. President, thank you for giving me the floor to explain our position on this resolution. We support all efforts to improve the transparency in the work of the Security Council, General Assembly, and the UN as a whole. It was under this spirit that Indonesia joined consensus on this resolution. Hence, it is regrettable that our endeavor to improve the transparency of the Security Council was conducted through a non-inclusive and untransparent process. Indonesia regrets the take it or leave it approach forced upon the wider member state in the drafting process of this resolution, which was conducted under no negotiation process with the wider member state. An outreach after the resolution of submission to the General Assembly is not a negotiation process. Only through a negotiation process could we improve the draft, which carries the collective views of the wider member state, a key principle of the GA. Moreover, we once again emphasize our call to end the double standard or the pick and choose approach in our work in the UN. We should all be able to listen to the rationale behind the use of all veto without any exception, with or without the issue being the ESS agenda of the GA. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Indonesia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Belarus.
Спасибо, господин председатель.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Республика Беларусь, как страна, пережившая все ужасы нацистской оккупации, победившая коричневую чуму, и как одна из стран-основателей ООН, всегда самым внимательным и ответственным образом относилась к вопросу выполнения Организацией Объединенных Наций своей основной функции – поддержания международного мира и безопасности. Мы весьма встревожены тем, что в Совете Безопасности ООН имеются существенные противоречия между постоянными членами. Это весьма опасная ситуация. Что еще более опасно, игнорировать эти противоречия и искать простые обходные пути. К сожалению, именно это нам и предлагается сделать в рассмотренной сегодня Генеральной Ассамблее резолюции. Вместо того, чтобы разобраться в глубинных причинах противоречий, невозможности достижения консенсуса в рамках Совета Безопасности, в причинах неготовности постоянных членов Совета приходить к компромиссу, авторы полагаются на грубую силу, свою способность формировать большинство в Генеральной Ассамблее путем всевозможных ухищрений. Об этом, кстати, они тоже открыто заявляют. Республика Беларусь внимательно изучила текст проекта резолюции и решила не нарушать консенсус, но при этом приняла решение дистанцироваться от консенсуса. Хотели бы пояснить мотивы нашего решения. Прежде всего, хотим констатировать неприемлемый порядок разработки документа. Работа над проектом велась за закрытыми дверями. Нам неизвестно ни об одном полноценном раунде открытого, инклюзивного и транспарентного обсуждения документа. Такой подход сам по себе вызывает сомнения в добросовестности и благонамеренности автора. Второе. Проведенный уже после публикации текста единственный обмен мнениями 19 апреля, очевидно, был формальным мероприятием. Авторы не только не смогли пояснить большую часть заданных делегациями вопросов, но и не учли прозвучавшие замечания, сделав лишь минимальные косметические правки в документе. После нескольких дней, весьма поспешно, проект был вынесен на рассмотрение Генеральной Ассамблеи. В чем причина такой спешки? Тем более, что, как утверждают авторы, в Генеральной Ассамблее и так есть полномочия делать все то, что предлагает резолюция. Напомним, что резолюция Генеральной Ассамблеи «Единство в пользу мира» от 3 ноября 1950 года дает широкие полномочия Генеральной Ассамблее принимать меры, если Совет Безопасности оказывается не в состоянии выполнять свои главные обязанности. Содержание документа является также проблематичным. Проект резолюции имеет открытый политический окрас и страновую направленность. Этого факта авторы также не отрицают. Документ грубо нарушает заложенную в Уставе ООН стройную структуру функционирования системы ООН и противоречит ключевому принципу разделения труда между ее главными органами. Резолюция не добавляет той транспарентности, о которой упоминали авторы в работу Совета Безопасности. Слова «транспарентность», «открытость», «подотчетность» даже не употребляются в тексте. Данное решение должно было рассматриваться как один из возможных элементов реформы Совета Безопасности ООН. Считаем, что вычленение отдельных элементов из комплекса вопросов реформы Совета лишь отдаляет международное сообщество от принятия так нужного всем нам решения. Работа над реформой Совета фактически обесценивается, когда принимаются решения, соответствующие интересам только одной группы стран, а проблемные вопросы других групп остаются без внимания. И в завершение об активизации работы системы ООН и Генеральной Ассамблеи. Последние несколько лет страны-члены и секретариат ООН констатируют, что повестка дня и график мероприятий перегружены, что негативно сказывается на практических результатах работы всей системы ООН. Создание механизма автоматического проведения заседаний Генеральной Ассамблеи неизбежно приведет к процедурной коллизии в ее работе, что лишь усугубит нагромождение вопросов и никак не будет способствовать целям активизации и укрепления деятельности ООН, которые лежат в основе одноименного пункта повестки дня Генеральной Ассамблеи, и под которым, как мы находим весьма ироничным, была вынесена на рассмотрение эта резолюция.
Ironically, this resolution was introduced.
Благодарю за внимание.
I thank you for your attention.
I thank the distinguished representative of Belarus, and I'll give the floor to the distinguished representative of Algeria.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. لقد انضم وفد الجزائر لصالح القرار المعنون تكليف دائم لمناقشة الجمعية العامة عندما يتم استخدام حق النقض في مجلس الأمن باعتباره آلية إجرائية تهدف إلى تعزيز دور وسلطات الجمعية العامة ووظائفها في المسائل المتعلقة بحفظ السلم والأمن الدوليين بصفتها الجهاز التمثيلي الرئيسي للتداول وصنع السياسة العامة للأمم المتحدة وبالتالي من المهم النظر لهذه المبادرة في السياق العام الأوسع لتعزيز التعددية والاستجابة لدعوة
promoting multilateralism to strengthen transparency and accountability and avoiding selectivity. This resolution is an institutional step forward. It's a well-timed move. It's a modest move when it comes to complementarity between the main organs of the UN in order for each organ to unleash its potential.
إن مجرد حساب لحالات اللجوء التعسفي إلى حق النقض يعمل لصالح إضفاء الطابع الديمقراطي الصريح على عمل جميع الأجهزة لا سيما مجلس الأمن لكن بطريقة هيكلية وليس بشكل ظرفي. سيد الرئيس الزملاء الأعزاء
Mr. Chair,
إن التحديات الكبيرة المفروضة حاليا على العالم والبشرية جمعاً تفرض علينا اليوم أي أكثر من أي وقت مضى ضرورة تعزيز التعاون والتضامن الدولي من أجل تفعيل آليات العمل متعددة الأطراف بشكل أكثر فعالية وإنشاء قواعد نظام عالمي جديد تضمن مشاركة متساوية لجميع الدول دون أدنى تمييز. لتحقيق ذلك يتعين علينا العمل سويا للدفع بعملية الإصلاح الشامل لمنظومة الأمم المتحدة من أجل تحسين أدائها to improve its work, strengthen its efficiency, to discharge its duties and obligations under the Charter. We need to focus on the central role of the GA and Security Council reform to promote transparency and equitable geographical representation and to right the wrongs imposed on Africa. My delegation would like to reiterate the commitment to the ING to reform the Security Council, as this is the only framework to reform the Security Council المؤرخ في 15 ديسمبر 2008. كما نؤكد في هذا الصدد على أهمية اتباع نهج متكامل يدعو إلى إجراء إصلاح حقيقي وشامل لمجلس الأمن يضم المسائل الرئيسية الخمسة الواردة في القرار بما يتماشى مع الموقف الإفريقي الموحد على النحو المنصوص عليه في توافق إيزلويني وإعلان سر. وعلى العموم فإن المقاربة التي اتبعتها الجزائر في مجال منظومة الأمم المتحدة تنسجم بشكل عام مع جميع المبادرات الهادفة إلى تعزيز العلاقات التكاملية والتفاعلية بين الجمعية العامة ومجلس الأمن، والتي تفسح المجال لجميع الدول للإعراب عن موقفها والتعبير عن آرائها وتوقعاتها بشأن العديد من القضايا التي تقع ضمن اختصاص مجلس الأمن، والتي يتعين أن تظل على رأس جدول أعمال الأمم المتحدة. في الختام لا بد من التسليم بأن تعزيز العمل متعدد الأطراف لا يزال المنهج الوحيد الممكن لرفع التحديات التي تفرضها المرحلة الحالية الحاسمة، مع الأخذ في الاعتبار بأن هدفنا الأساسي يكمن في السعي المشترك للمساهمة بشكل جماعي لدعم أهداف ومبادئ الأمم المتحدة حتى تتمكن منظمتنا من الاطلاع بمهامها بشكل أكثر فعالية ونجاعة لضمان حق الشعوب، حق الإنسان في العيش الكريم في كنف الحرية والسلام والكرامة. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Algeria. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Thailand.
Mr. President, Thailand supports ongoing efforts to enhance transparency in the United Nations, whether in the UN General Assembly or the UN Security Council. In our view, the resolution just adopted reflects a well-intentioned effort that seeks to promote greater transparency in the work of the UN Security Council, particularly on the use of the veto. The stated aspirations behind and principle underlying these efforts are important and commendable. At the same time, what is equally important is for a resolution of such significance, one with wider and longer-term institutional implications, especially on the interrelationship between the Security Council and the General Assembly, such a resolution should benefit from a more wide-ranging and comprehensive consultations with the UN membership. While we recognize that the genesis of the resolution has been around for some time, and that the pandemic unfortunately suspended work on it, we also note that efforts to take forward the draft picked up dramatically in the past few weeks. This accelerated process has, in our view, placed some limitations on comprehensive consultations that would have been beneficial to all. On the substance of the resolution, the issue of automaticity for the president of the UNGA to automatically convene a formal meeting of the UNGA after a veto or vetoes have been casted in the UN Security Council merits serious reflections. In our view, the UNGA process should be as member states driven as possible, and with good reason. Automaticity, however well-meaning, takes we, the member states, out of the decision-making loop, and in so doing, reduces flexibility and limits options, two key assets of diplomacy. Going forward, we hope that the resolution, having now been adopted, would be implemented in a consistent manner across the board in order to reinforce the resilience and people's faith in our multilateral system in general and the UN General Assembly in particular. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Thailand and now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Papua New Guinea.
Mr. President, let me, on my delegation's behalf, acknowledge the leadership and the efforts of the core group of countries on the establishment of the General Assembly standing mandate to deal with the use of the veto in the Security Council subsequent to its meeting where veto is cast. The veto debate is not only politically sensitive, but an emotionally charged one with its positive and negative implications. Veto custodians in the Security Council have a duty of responsibility rather than a right, and its application must be in the letter and spirit of engendering international peace and security as provided under the UN Charter. For Papua New Guinea, as a small developing country, the rule of law and the respect for and upholding of international law commitments and obligations, including the UN Charter, is a safety valve that affords and assures security and protection of states like mine. Papua New Guinea joined the consensus on the General Assembly resolution just adopted as its intent is one we share. We note that this resolution is said to be of a procedural nature. However, it has potential wider substantive implications as it relates to the international peace and security agenda and on the mandates of both the Security Council and the General Assembly. This is why we had raised several issues of importance to us during the only wider UN membership informal consultations held last week. One of the particular concerns to my delegation was the inclusivity and the transparency of the process in the context of meaningful multilateralism. Having enclosed small configurations with limited wider consultations to prepare important UN General Assembly initiatives, including resolutions, whether it be procedural or substantive in nature, is not a substitute for an inclusive and transparent process in this august body, and also not in the spirit of our collective efforts for dialogue. We, however, welcome the outreach for dialogue and appreciate the flexibility of the core group and co-sponsors of the just adopted resolution in facilitating the inclusion of new elements suggested by my delegation and others, particularly relating to UN Charter Article 27. Mr. President, as we meet here today in establishing a General Assembly standing mandate to deal with the aftermath of the use of the veto in the Security Council, we are yet again reminded of the needless suffering and the pain the people and the government of Ukraine are currently subjected to as a dire consequence of the veto invoked by a permanent member of the Security Council who breached the mandate and trust bestowed upon members of the Security Council under a UN Charter to prevent the scourge of war. It is incumbent on all of us to be better collective guardians of our international peace and security and not just leave this to the Security Council in its current outdated format. We cannot afford anymore to have a Security Council that is not fit for purpose, has questionable accountability, with an opaque personality and unrepresentative of today's realities. We need a council that is truly an organ that better serves we, the peoples of the United Nations, rather than the self-serving interests of a few. It is once again this that brings to the fore the pressing importance of the reform of the Security Council. It is on this basis and from this lens that my delegation saw the necessity for us to join the consensus and support the General Assembly resolution just adopted. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Papua New Guinea. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Namibia on behalf of the C10.
Do I have the microphone? Yeah. Mr. President, in Namibia's capacity as member of the African Union Committee of 10 on the reform of the United Nations Security Council, I have the honor to deliver this explanation of vote after the vote on behalf of the African Union member states following the General Assembly's adoption of draft resolution A/76/L52 on agenda item 124, strengthening of the United Nations system, otherwise known as the Veto Initiative. The African Union member states thank the delegation of Liechtenstein and the other co-sponsors of the resolution for the initiative and for the engagements over time with member states explaining the rationale, nature, and scope of the Veto Initiative. We have been engaged in the process leading to the adoption of the draft resolution and have acted on the basis of each African Union member state expressing their sovereign will on this purely procedural resolution, in our view. This explanation of vote after the vote is focused on putting on record the position of the African Union member states on the issue of the reform of the United Nations Security Council, in particular on the cluster of the question of the veto under the agenda item on the question of equitable representation on and increase in the membership of the Security Council and other matters related to the Security Council. Mr. President, Africa remains convinced of the need for a comprehensive reform of the United Nations system, which will significantly contribute to upholding the principles, objectives, and ideals of the UN Charter for a fairer world based on universalism, equity, and regional balance. In particular, Africa attaches great importance to the reform of the UN Security Council. We are of the firm view that reform is needed to improve the Security Council and make it an accessible, accountable, transparent, democratic, representative, and a more effective organ of the United Nations, and thus give it legitimacy to its decisions and better reflect the current geopolitical realities. Africa has a clear position on the 5 clusters of the intergovernmental negotiations on the reform of the Security Council, including on the question of the veto, and the agreed decision for a comprehensive reform of the Security Council as outlined in General Assembly Decision 62/557. We would therefore like to underline our firm position that the adopted resolution on the Veto Initiative is distinct from the intergovernmental negotiations on the reform of the Security Council and has no bearing or impact on General Assembly Decision 62/557 and the Common African Position as espoused in the Esloveni Consensus and the Sirte Declaration. Africa remains true and faithful to the General Assembly Decision 62/557 and other relevant General Assembly decisions for a comprehensive reform of the Security Council on all the 5 clusters, taking into account their interconnectedness. We therefore welcome the last preamble paragraph in the adopted resolution, which unequivocally states, and I quote, bearing in mind its decision 62/557, and that the present resolution and its provisions are without prejudice to the intergovernmental negotiations on Security Council reform, end of quote. In conclusion, Mr. President, we reiterate the call for a comprehensive reform of the United Nations system to ensure that the organization is fit for purpose and lead in addressing persistent challenges and fragilities, as we have been urged by our heads of state and government in the United Nations 75th Anniversary Declaration, to instill new life in the reform process. And I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Namibia on behalf of the C10. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pakistan has supported the adoption of the resolution A/76/L52 under Agenda Item 124, Strengthening of the United Nations System by consensus. Pakistan agrees with the overall objective of this resolution, which is to bring greater responsibility in the conduct of the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. Pakistan appreciates that the co-sponsors have added PP8, which recalls UN General Assembly Decision 62/557, and notes that the present resolution and its provisions are without prejudice to the intergovernmental negotiations on Security Council reform. We also welcome the inclusion of PP3 and PP5 in the text, recalling Articles 12 and 27, respectively, of the UN Charter. Under these provisions, it is clear that the trigger for holding the General Assembly session in the wake of a veto from a permanent member is a situation where the Council is prevented from acting on questions relating to maintenance of international peace and security. We also believe that slight modifications to the language in OP1 could have expressed this qualification with clarity. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Pakistan. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Argentina.
Señor Presidente, como miembro fundador de las Naciones Unidas, la Argentina tiene un firme compromiso con los propósitos y principios de la Carta. Desde las negociaciones de la Conferencia de San Francisco en 1945 y con mayor énfasis en la primera Asamblea General celebrada en octubre de 1946, la Argentina fijó una posición muy firme contra el veto. La Argentina ha reiterado su posición en contra del veto y a favor de una reforma del Consejo de Seguridad con el consenso de los Estados miembros en todas las oportunidades en las que fue considerada esta cuestión, en particular desde que se inició el proceso de negociaciones intergubernamentales. El Consejo debe ser más democrático, transparente, eficiente, representativo y responsable ante la comunidad internacional. La Argentina se ha sumado al consenso de la presente resolución por ser consistente con su posición histórica sobre el veto, como privilegio violatorio del principio de la igualdad soberana entre los Estados que debe ser abolido. Teniendo presente el proceso en curso de negociaciones intergubernamentales para la reforma del Consejo de Seguridad, mi delegación quiere hacer hincapié en que esta resolución ha sido aprobada de acuerdo con su párrafo 8 del preámbulo, que recuerda la decisión 62/557 de la Asamblea General y afirma que su contenido no impacta en el proceso intergubernamental de reforma del Consejo de Seguridad. Muchas gracias.
I thank the distinguished representative of Argentina. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Mr. President, my delegation joined the consensus on the draft resolution contained in L52. However, we would like to state the following. As a founding member of the United Nations, the Islamic Republic of Iran has been a staunch supporter of the United Nations' strengthening role as the cornerstone of multilateralism in maintaining international peace and security. Iran has also called on the Security Council to act in a more efficient, transparent, effective, and accountable manner. In this context, ending the Security Council's wrong and unlawful practices, as well as its application of double standards, which is harmful to the international peace and security and incompatible with the UN's purposes and principles, should remain at the forefront of any efforts to strengthen the UN system. According to Article 24(2) of the Charter, the Security Council, in carrying out its responsibilities, shall act in accordance with the purposes and principles of the United Nations. This means that the Council's powers and authority are limited, it is not above the law, and it cannot act arbitrarily or without regard for international law. Furthermore, Article 24(1) through Article 24(1), the Security Council has been given primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security by the member states. This means that the Council has a legal, political, and moral responsibility to act properly and responsibly, and members of the Council must make decisions based on the common interests of the organization's entire membership rather than on their own national interests or those of the geopolitical or geographical groups which they belong. The Council is responsible to the member states on behalf of whom it acts and must therefore maintain accountable to them. This indeed is the raison d'etre of the Charter's Article 24(3), which requires the Council to submit annual or special reports to the General Assembly where all member states are presented. The UN bodies should refrain from interfering in each other's competencies and responsibilities. The UN Charter serves as a yardstick in this regard. All UN organs, including the Security Council, must adhere to the principles of impartiality, effectiveness, and professionalism, and refrain from interfering in the internal affairs of states and in pursuance of certain political interests acting against their independence. The veto is foreseen in the Charter. However, due to the fact that it has been used arbitrarily since the UN's inception, its usage must be regulated. The use of veto must be consistent with the purposes and principles of the Charter, as well as other principles of international law enshrined in the 1970 Declaration on Principles of International Law concerning friendly relations and cooperation among states, particularly sovereign equality of states, non-use of force, and non-intervention in the internal and international affairs of states. As stated in preambular paragraph 8, the present resolution and its provisions are without prejudice to the intergovernmental negotiations on the Security Council reform. In this regard, we reiterate our commitment to the Security Council reform within the existing formats and emphasize that transforming the Council into a truly rule-based and accountable body must remain a top priority. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Islamic Republic of Iran. I now give the floor to the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. Please allow me to say a few words as regards the resolution that was just passed. Quite frankly, we have no desire to join in with the consensus, and let me explain why. The right of veto for the permanent members of the Security Council is a cornerstone of the UN architecture. Without it, the Security Council would become a rubber-stamping body, rubber-stamping questionable decisions imposed by the nominal majority, whose implementation would be hardly possible. History, as we know, has seen many multilateral mechanisms where there were attempts to do without a veto, but as we all know, no good came of this. In this regard, we are convinced that what needs to be criticized is not the veto, but rather the lack of readiness of some members of Security Council to listen to and take into account the opinion of others, their inability to find compromise and balanced decisions. And this frequently is the very thing which compels the use of the veto. Veto, of course, is a measure of last resort and is used at a time when other possibilities are exhausted. And that is why, when using this instrument, the permanent members of the Security Council provide most exhaustive clarifications as to why the veto was cast. And all such statements are open and accessible. Permanent members of the Security Council, of course, could also easily provide the same explanations to also all member states of the General Assembly. But we don't see, quite frankly, any value added to such an exercise. The decision which was made today, whilst it does have a very pretty packaging, is without any doubt an attempt to create an instrument of exerting pressure on the permanent members of the Security Council. And this is the approach that we categorically reject. The division of powers between the Security Council and the General Assembly is what has allowed our United Nations to function effectively for now more than 75 years. And neither those who advocated broadening the authority of the General Assembly at the expense of the Security Council, nor those who brought into the Security Council the issues which should be considered by the General Assembly, has ever enjoyed our support. And this is our position of principle. And therefore, we will, as before, continue to be guided by what is stated in Article 12 of the UN Charter, according to which the General Assembly cannot issue any recommendations on issues which are under consideration by the Security Council. It is obvious to us that the initiative, which is a basis for this resolution, cannot resolve either major or smaller issues that the member states or the United Nations has to tackle. But at the same time, what it does is it risks bringing in additional irritants into the situation, which, when they were being considered in the Security Council, the veto was cast. It's difficult for us at this stage to evaluate all of the potential ramifications of this decision. Therefore, passing the resolution today is something that doesn't give rise to any kind of a positive emotion with us. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Cuba.
Señor Presidente, Mr. President, Cuba has always defended the fact that the General Assembly should fully assume the role entrusted to it by the United Nations in terms of international peace and security. The mandate of the Assembly on these issues has been severely undermined because of the growing trend in the Security Council to usurp its functions. The Council is increasingly expanding the definition of international peace and security to the detriment of the important functions and responsibilities that fall to the General Assembly, which is the most democratic and representative organ in the United Nations. We also are in favor of an urgent and broad reform of the Security Council to make it a representative, democratic and transparent organ. The delegation of Cuba did not oppose the adoption of this resolution without a vote. At the same time, we would like to place on record several concerns and understandings with respect to the text adopted. First of all, we understand that this resolution does not replace the provisions of Articles 8b and 9b of the Rules of Procedure of the General Assembly on the convening of emergency special sessions. For this reason, it is our view that we should explicitly exclude the possibility of the President of the General Assembly convening a debate under the operative paragraph 1 of the resolution we approved today if there was a prior voting by the General Assembly on the resolution 367A5, Union for Peace, in which most member states spoke in favor of convening the General Assembly to discuss that same issue. Secondly, it is our view that it is not enough to eliminate the presentation of special reports of the Security Council for limiting it to those cases in which the veto was used. This would be a clearly restrictive and selective approach with respect to what was set out in the Charter on 5.1 and 24.3. Reiteramos la posición del movimiento de países no alineados apoyada por Cuba de que el Consejo de Seguridad está en la obligación de presentar informes especiales para consideración de la Asamblea General cada vez que sea necesario y no solo para cuestiones relacionadas con el veto. Tercero, la cuestión del veto no debe considerarse de manera separada del resto de las cuestiones que están bajo el mandato del Grupo de Negociaciones Intergubernamentales sobre la reforma del Consejo de Seguridad establecido en virtud de la decisión 62/557 de la Asamblea General. Los 5 temas claves identificados para la reforma de este órgano, entre los que se incluye la cuestión del veto, están estrechamente relacionados y conforman un paquete. De otra manera, no se podría alcanzar la reforma integral del Consejo que necesitamos. Lo dispuesto en el párrafo operativo 4 de la resolución hoy aprobada sobre la inclusión del tema uso del veto como un tema permanente de la agenda de la Asamblea General a partir del 77 periodo ordinario de sesiones de la Asamblea, en modo alguno puede ser interpretado en perjuicio de los vínculos indisolubles que existen entre las 5 cuestiones que aborda el proceso intergubernamental being discussed by the intergovernmental process on the reform of the Council under 62/557. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Cuba. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Colombia.
Muchas gracias,
Thank you
señor
very much,
presidente.
Mr. President.
Sobre la resolución que se acaba de adoptar, Colombia desea expresar los siguientes puntos. Como miembro fundador de las Naciones Unidas, Colombia tiene una posición tradicional de cuestionamiento del veto y defensa de su eliminación. Consideramos que el papel que desempeña el Consejo de Seguridad dentro del mecanismo contemplado en la Carta es importante y no debe soslayarse. Colombia considera que el sistema ya cuenta con un valioso instrumento para hacer frente a situaciones en las que el Consejo de Seguridad se estanca por efecto del ejercicio del veto. La resolución Unión Pro Paz de 1950, que ha probado su valor y su eficacia, contempla un procedimiento y un mecanismo que le permite a la Asamblea General ocuparse de una situación relativa al mantenimiento de la paz y la seguridad internacionales cuando el Consejo se tornó inoperante debido a la aplicación del veto. Adicionalmente, contiene las salvaguardias procesales necesarias para que no se abuse de la figura y se asegure que el respeto de la distribución de funciones prevista en la Carta de la Organización. De especial relevancia es el hecho que, salvo circunstancias excepcionales, es el propio Consejo el que debe convocar al periodo de emergencia de la Asamblea General, asegurando así el respeto del artículo 12 de la Carta. En estas condiciones consideramos que un mecanismo nuevo, como el indicado en la resolución aprobada, no es en realidad necesario y produce el efecto de transformar el sistema de acción para el mantenimiento de la paz y la seguridad internacionales previsto en la Carta y altera de facto las funciones del Consejo, dejando a este órgano de lado en aquellos casos en los que un miembro permanente ha ejercido el derecho de veto.
Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Colombia. We have heard the last speaker in explanation of votes after the vote. We will now hear statements after the adoption of the resolution. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sweden on behalf of the Nordic countries.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Nordic countries, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, and my own country, Sweden. Mr. President, we would like to thank Liechtenstein for this important initiative. The Nordic countries wholeheartedly welcome the adoption of the resolution today. The fulfillment of the principal tasks of the United Nations, the maintenance of international peace and security, depends on a Security Council that delivers in accordance with its mandate. The Charter of the United Nations entrusts the Security Council with the primary responsibility to maintain international peace and security. The use of the veto to prevent the Council from discharging its charter-based duties is a matter of great concern. During the last 5 years, for instance, the veto has been used to block action of the Security Council no less than 17 times. As the most recent instance of the use of the veto by Russia further highlights, there is an urgent need for veto restraint and for more transparency and accountability when the veto power is used. The Nordic countries have been consistent supporters of initiatives that seek to make sure that the Council is not prevented by the use of veto from taking action with the aim of preventing or bringing an end to situation involving commissions of mass atrocities. The resolution adopted today will supplement these efforts. It is a significant step towards accountability and transparency in the use of the veto power. That is also why we have supported the initiative since the inception 2 years ago. The Security Council is entrusted with the responsibility to maintain peace and security on behalf of us, the member states represented here in this assembly. Thus, it is natural that when permanent members of the Council use their veto to block Council action, they are invited to the General Assembly to explain their positions and that all member states have the opportunity to discuss the matter. The resolution adopted today in no way encroaches on the veto power, but seeks to increase the transparency and accountability in its use. We hope that a new mandate will contribute to the effectiveness of the Security Council and to its ability to discharge its duty. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Sweden on behalf of the Nordic countries. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lithuania.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the 3 Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and my own country, Lithuania. We applaud the adoption of the General Assembly resolution entitled Standing Mandate for a General Assembly Debate when a veto is cast in the Security Council. We are proud to have presented the draft resolution together with a cross-regional group of states and to have provided a consistent support throughout the negotiation and preparation process, which was skillfully steered by Ambassador of Liechtenstein and his team. We are grateful to all the UN member states for their support to the resolution to render the use of veto more transparent. We are inspired by the strong support of the membership to the initiative. This momentous adoption reaffirms our strong commitment to the Charter of the United Nations and provides an opportunity to renew our dedication to it. The Baltic states welcome a strong determination of the international community to reflect on the significance of the Charter to the international peace and security and its fundamental importance to an effectively functioning multilateralism. Today's adoption is a strong result of the consistently increasing advocacy for a more resilient role of the General Assembly in matters of international peace and security as mandated by the Charter. We believe it is necessary to make the UN more capable and restore its reputation. This resolution is a very meaningful step in that direction. We also note that this adoption took place at a particularly timely juncture as the discussion within the international community regained new traction following the large-scale, unprovoked, unlawful, and unjustified Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. Aside of shedding new light on Russia's continuous misuse of its perch on the Security Council to misrepresent international norms, sow discord, and spread disinformation in the pursuit of national interest, it is also a stark reminder of the daring implications of the reduced ability of the Council to take effective action against threats to international peace and security. This again points to a pressing need to reaffirm our commitment to the Charter and strengthen the role of the General Assembly. It is a joint responsibility of us, the UN member states, to act in earnest, not only to talk, and to abide by principles of the Charter, not merely profess our support to them. It calls for time, motivation, and commitment, but it's a fundamental effort. As the principal international organization with the aim of maintaining peace and security, the United Nations has a unique responsibility to reevaluate and reinvent itself in order to speak productive ways to deliver on the promise of peace. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Lithuania on behalf of the Baltic countries. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Luxembourg on behalf of the Benelux countries.
Monsieur le Président, je vous remercie de me donner la parole. J'ai en effet l'honneur de m'exprimer au nom des 3 pays du Benelux, la Belgique, les Pays-Bas et mon propre pays, le Luxembourg. Les pays du Benelux sont fiers d'avoir coparrainé la résolution qui vient d'être adoptée par consensus et qui établit un mandat permanent pour que cette Assemblée générale tienne un débat en cas de recours au veto au Conseil de sécurité. Nous remercions le Liechtenstein pour son leadership sur cette importante résolution. L'adoption d'aujourd'hui intervient après plus de 2 ans de préparation et de très larges consultations entre les États membres. Nous nous réjouissons du fait qu'en conséquence de cela, la résolution bénéficie d'un très large soutien transrégional. La résolution que nous avons adoptée indique clairement que ces dispositions sont sans préjudice des négociations intergouvernementales sur la réforme du Conseil de sécurité. L'objectif n'est pas de réformer le Conseil de sécurité, mais de renforcer le rôle de l'Assemblée générale en établissant un mécanisme permettant à cette Assemblée de se réunir dans les 10 jours ouvrables suivant l'exercice du veto par un ou plusieurs membres permanents du Conseil de sécurité et de tenir un débat sur la situation au sujet de laquelle le veto a été opposé, sous réserve que l'Assemblée ne tienne pas de session extraordinaire d'urgence sur cette même situation. À ce moment critique pour les Nations Unies, cette résolution envoie un signal important en faveur du multilatéralisme. Le recours au veto s'est considérablement accru ces dernières années, empêchant le Conseil de sécurité de s'acquitter efficacement de son mandat et de maintenir la paix et la sécurité internationale. Parmi les exemples récents, citons le veto exercé à la fin de l'année dernière, le 13 décembre 2021, qui a empêché l'adoption par le Conseil de sécurité d'une résolution traitant du lien crucial entre le climat et la sécurité, qui était soutenue par une large majorité d'États membres. Ce recours accru au veto est lourd de conséquences pour le travail et l'efficacité du Conseil de sécurité et de l'ONU dans son ensemble. La Charte des Nations Unies est très claire. Permettez-moi de citer le paragraphe 1 de son article 24. Afin d'assurer l'action rapide et efficace de l'organisation, ses membres confèrent au Conseil de sécurité la responsabilité principale du maintien de la paix et de la sécurité internationale et reconnaissent qu'en s'acquittant des devoirs que lui impose cette responsabilité, le Conseil de sécurité agit en leur nom. Le Conseil de sécurité agit au nom de tous les États membres de l'ONU et dans cet esprit, il est parfaitement logique que nous, les États membres, tenions un débat à l'Assemblée générale chaque fois que l'utilisation du veto par un ou plusieurs membres permanents du Conseil de sécurité a rendu impossible une action rapide et efficace des Nations unies. L'utilisation du veto n'est pas un privilège, mais une lourde responsabilité. La résolution que nous venons d'adopter est une étape cruciale pour renforcer le multilatéralisme en rendant les membres permanents du Conseil de sécurité plus responsables devant l'ensemble des membres lorsqu'ils utilisent le veto pour bloquer l'adoption d'une résolution du Conseil de sécurité. Il s'agit d'un pas en avant crucial pour la responsabilité et la transparence et nous sommes heureux d'avoir pu franchir cette étape aujourd'hui avec le soutien de tant d'États membres. Je vous remercie.
I thank the distinguished representative of Luxembourg on behalf of Benelux countries. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Albania.
Thank you, Mr. President. Albania has supported from the very beginning this initiative and is a proud co-sponsor of the resolution adopted today without a vote in this House. The reasons for doing so are very simple and straightforward, and we have said them before. Mr. President, we find ourselves at the cusp of a major global reordering that is putting into question the basic rules and institutions that came out of the most calamitous war in history, namely to maintain peace and security. This body, the GA, has conferred upon the Security Council the primary responsibility to maintain peace and security. That responsibility has not been discharged in accordance with the aspirations it was envisaged, at least not always. Far too often it has shown a dereliction of its duties. The Russian aggression against Ukraine has made that painfully visible for everyone to see. The Russian veto has turned the Council into the bulwark of the service of Russian lies and manipulation, a threat to peace and security. This is not good for the Council, not good for the UN, not good for the world. Distinguished delegates, we respect the Council. We think it has a vital role to play in questions that make a difference between life and death. Indeed, that is the reason we asked for your support to serve in this praised organ. But we see up close how this body can be used for short-sighted interests of specific countries against the common interest of humanity, of the billions of people who want to live in peace and dignity. The abuse of veto undermines the legitimacy of not only the Council, but of the entire UN. That opens the gates of fragmentation, disintegration, and decay of the rule-based international order. We cannot let this happen. And we are glad that we were able to speak with one voice against such anomaly. 76 years ago, the Charter included the veto as a guarantee that great powers would never disagree to the point of returning to war. They would resort to the veto, this special privilege with responsibility when their crucial national interests were involved. But as we have seen over the years, the veto has been used and abused many times without any clear reason or justification. Therefore, we need to make sure, to the best of our abilities, that the veto is not used only as an exclusive privilege, but rather as a heavy responsibility. The use of veto as an exclusive privilege without responsibility is a violation of the spirit of the historic compromise that created the veto. It betrays the aspirations of the world to attain peace and security. And this resolution is doing exactly this, bringing a sense of responsibility to the use of veto. This resolution sends a clear message to the world that the wider membership of the UN retains URI's generative capacity to make law and strengthen multilateralism by closing the gap between two major organs of the UN, the Security Council and the General Assembly. And I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Albania. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Costa Rica.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Queremos agradecerle a la misión de Liechtenstein por su liderazgo con esta iniciativa de la que somos parte de su core group y copatrocinadores. Lo hicimos porque el veto ha fracasado como una herramienta del derecho internacional. El veto no es un derecho, es un privilegio demasiado poderoso para existir. Un privilegio anacrónico que crea odiosas diferencias tanto al interior del Consejo como entre la membresía. Diferencias que no deberíamos contribuir a acrecentar, sino por el contrario, trabajar juntos para limitar y eliminarlas. Con mucha frecuencia, lo que se denomina como veto oculto es utilizado para bloquear o diluir a un mínimo común denominador aquellas resoluciones que están ahí para salvar vidas. Cada vez que se utiliza, un veto puede convertirse con facilidad en la sentencia de muerte para millones de personas. Su mera existencia entorpece y paraliza a esta organización como garante de paz y de seguridad. En lugar de actuar, el veto obliga a la ONU a observar desde afuera y eso la desprestigia increíblemente. Al ser incapaz de intervenir para prevenir y resolver los conflictos, el Consejo de Seguridad se transforma en un consejo de inseguridad global, lo que conlleva graves y costosas consecuencias en forma de conflictos prolongados y pérdida de vidas humanas. Su uso ha socavado la legitimidad y credibilidad del Consejo y de esta organización también. Señor Presidente, el veto no es la piedra angular de las Naciones Unidas, sino su lápida. No es más que un viejo fantasma de un mundo que dejó de existir ya hace mucho tiempo atrás. Es una práctica inmoral en su naturaleza que ratificó la convicción de Costa Rica de que es necesario ponerle límites a su irrestricto uso. Con la resolución que hoy se acaba de adoptar, se establece un mecanismo que dispone la celebración de un debate ante esta Asamblea General cada vez que se emita un veto en el Consejo de Seguridad. Este mecanismo además le solicita al Consejo de Seguridad presentar un informe especial sobre el veto previo al debate en cuestión y prevé también la inclusión del tema sobre uso del veto en el programa de periodo de sesiones 77 de la Asamblea General. Esta resolución es un paso histórico hacia la rendición de cuentas y sobre todo la transparencia. Materializa el legítimo reclamo de los Estados miembros de que el Consejo de Seguridad debe rendir cuentas a aquellos en cuyo nombre actúa, que somos todos los Estados miembros de esta organización. Honra también los principios consagrados en la Carta de las Naciones Unidas, como lo son la rendición de cuentas, la clarificación de competencias, la información transparente y el equilibrio funcional. Sobre la relación entre la Asamblea General y el Consejo de Seguridad, somos, al igual que muchos otros países que lo acaban de mencionar en esta sala, conscientes de que falta muchísimo todavía por hacer. Esta es una relación complementaria. Es de dos vías, en la que por un lado el Consejo actúa en nombre de los Estados miembros y por el otro lado los Estados miembros proporcionan también recomendaciones sobre los temas que trata y los métodos que aplica en el proceso de toma de decisiones. Hasta ahora, señor Presidente, esta relación no ha sido más que un monólogo excluyente y nunca un diálogo. A partir de ahora, esto será distinto. Muchas gracias.
I thank the distinguished representative of Costa Rica. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the General Assembly is the only fully universal and therefore most representative organ of the United Nations. As the very embodiment and soul of multilateralism, this chamber has priority and power over all other organs of the United Nations. Namely, under Article 15 of the Charter of the United Nations, all the organs of the United Nations system are mandated to submit reports to the GA for its consideration. And according to Article 24 of the United Nations Charter, the Security Council acts on behalf of the member states, which together compose the General Assembly. The member states confer on the Security Council primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. Unfortunately, however, on many occasions, we have seen the Security Council fail in carrying out its mandate. It could not provide timely and adequate responses to crises. it could not maintain international peace and security. As we all know, the veto power is the very reason for the frequent paralysis witnessed in the Security Council. It is not uncommon to see the permanent members exercise veto to pursue their self-interest. And most of the time, the use of veto has far-reaching consequences that can lead to or deepen humanitarian crisis and give rise to risks to the security and safety of the entire humanity. Mr. President, today, we, the Member States, have adopted a historic resolution. As of this day, the General Assembly has one more tool to address the matters pertaining to international peace and security. This is an important step to enhance the role of this vital organ in accordance with its mandate in the United Nations Charter. Likewise, this is an important step to make the Security Council more accountable and efficient. Turkey is proud to have been in the core group that led this initiative since its inception 2 years ago. We will continue to work with other member states to realize the promise of the United Nations Charter. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Turkey. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mexico.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Señor presidente,
Mr. President,
hoy
today,
la Asamblea General
the General Assembly
ha adoptado
has
una
adopted
resolución de indudable trascendencia.
Resolution, the importance of which is
Aun
beyond
cuando
dispute.
pueda parecer
As
una
modest
iniciativa
as this
modesta,
initiative may seem,
en realidad
in reality,
se trata de un
this
importante
is an
paso
important
hacia adelante
step
en el fortalecimiento
forward
de nuestra
in
organización.
strengthening our organization.
Hemos padecido
We have suffered
por la ausencia de un
from the
sistema
absence
efectivo de
of
rendición de
an
cuentas,
effective accountability
justificado
system,
en el argumento de que
justified
los
by the
órganos
argument that
principales de las
the
Naciones Unidas
principal
son
organs of
iguales
the United
y
Nations
por
are
ende no
equal
están
and
subordinados
therefore are not
unos a
subordinate
otros.
one to the other.
La importancia de la
The importance
responsabilidad
of the
conferida
responsibility
a un órgano
entrusted
de composición
to an
limitada
organ
como es el
with
Consejo de Seguridad
limited membership
debería
such
ser
as the Security
razón
Council
más que
should
suficiente
be
para que
reason
existiese
enough
un sistema
for there
eficaz
to be an
de rendición de
effective
cuentas.
system of
En todo
accountability.
caso,
In any event,
la tesis de la igualdad
the
entre los órganos
proposition
principales de la
of
organización
equality between the principal organs of the
desmentida
organization
por la
has been
práctica,
disproved
si
by
bien reciente,
practice.
de la
The
Asamblea
albeit
General
recent practice
al
of the General
debatir
Assembly
y opinar
of
en torno a los
debating and
informes
opining
tanto
on
de la Corte Internacional de
reports
Justicia
from
como
both
del Consejo de Seguridad.
the International Court
Ambos
of
órganos
Justice
principales.
as well as
Esta
the Security
práctica
Council,
se ha
both of
traducido
which are
en que la
principal
Corte,
organs. And this
a
practice
diferencia del
meant that the
Consejo de
Court,
Seguridad,
unlike the Security
rinde
Council,
informes cada vez más
does
sustantivos.
provide increasingly
Tanto
substantive
la Asamblea
reports.
General como la
Both
Corte
the General
coinciden
Assembly
en
and
que esta
the
práctica
Court
no
agree
pone en riesgo la
that
independencia
this
judicial de
practice
esta
does
última
not
y que,
jeopardize
por
the
el
judicial
contrario,
independence of the
constituye
Court
un apoyo
and
a
that,
su labor.
on the contrary, it serves to
De esta
strengthen the
suerte,
Court's work.
hemos impulsado una mayor
Accordingly,
colaboración y
we
diálogo
have pressed
entre
for
dos
more
órganos
collaboration
principales
and
de las
dialogue
Naciones
between
Unidas.
two principal organs of the United
El
Nations.
mejoramiento de esta interacción
Improving this
también ha sido una
interaction has
prioridad de
also
México
been a
en su
priority for
actual
Mexico in
participación
its current
como miembro
participation
electo del
as
Consejo
an
de Seguridad,
elected member of the
que
Security
derivó en
Council,
la adopción en
which led
noviembre
to
pasado
the adoption
de la
last
declaración
November of
presidencial
the presidential statement S/PRST/2021/23.
En dicha declaración,
In
el
that
Consejo de
statement,
Seguridad
the Security Council
expresa su
expresses
compromiso
its
permanente
standing
de
commitment
fomentar la
to
interacción de
promoting
forma periódica
interaction on a
entre todos
periodic
los órganos
basis between
principales,
all principal
incluida la
organs,
Asamblea General.
including the General Assembly.
Esta resolución,
This
por
resolution,
tanto,
therefore,
sirve
serves
para allanar el camino
to
hacia una
pave the
mayor
way
y mejor
toward
colaboración
more and
entre
better
ambos órganos
collaboration
principales,
between both principal
y más
organs,
aún cuando se trata de una
especially when
cuestión
dealing with
que es
an
de interés
issue
para
of
toda la
interest
comunidad
to the-
internacional en su conjunto,
to the
como lo
international
es
community
el
as a
ejercicio del
whole,
veto.
such as the use of the veto.
En este contexto,
In this
hoy
connection,
hemos también
we
fortalecido
also today
el mandato que se
strengthened
deriva
the
del artículo
mandate deriving
24,
from
párrafo
Article
1 de la
24,
Carta,
paragraph 1 of the Charter,
mandato que al indicar que el Consejo de Seguridad actúa a nombre de todos los Estados miembros de la organización, asume, por tanto, una responsabilidad en nombre de todos. Y si esto es así, ¿cómo justificar que él o los miembros permanentes que han decidido recurrir al veto no expliquen al resto de los Estados miembros las razones que los llevaron a impedir que el Consejo de Seguridad desempeñe la responsabilidad primordial que le encomienda la Carta de las Naciones Unidas? Más allá de las explicaciones de voto que se ofrezcan al interior del Consejo de Seguridad, a partir de ahora existe un mecanismo que reconoce y hace valer tanto el derecho de todos y cada uno de los miembros de la organización como la obligación para los miembros permanentes de recibir y otorgar respectivamente una explicación sobre los motivos que llevaron a vetar un proyecto de resolución en torno a cualquier tema. Porque cuando el veto se ejerce, no es solo la acción del Consejo de Seguridad la que se ve truncada o detenida, es en realidad toda la membresía delegada en el Consejo de Seguridad la que resulta víctima de la decisión de uno o más miembros permanentes. Como todos sabemos, el veto detiene la acción. El veto no fomenta la unidad. Se ha convertido en el ejercicio del veto revela la posición débil de aquel que no logró persuadir a los demás por medio de la razón. Bloquear la voluntad de los otros es el último recurso cuando los argumentos fallan. Por tanto, quien esgrime el veto no ofrece soluciones, simplemente obstruye la acción. Dicho de otra manera, quien recurre al veto prefiere impedir cualquier movimiento en lugar de enfrentar un problema con miras a solucionarlo. Resulta contraria a sus intereses internacional en su conjunto. Todo lo anterior debe llevarnos a refrendar un principio reconocido desde 1945 y que la mayoría de las veces olvidamos y que ha sido repetido esta mañana. El veto no es un privilegio, sino una responsabilidad. Declaración conjunta el 7 de junio de 1945 durante la conferencia de San Francisco. Tal declaración señala que, y cito, no debemos asumir, sin embargo, que los miembros permanentes, tanto más que los miembros no permanentes, podrán hacer uso voluntariamente de su poder de veto para obstruir la operación del Consejo. Fin de la cita. Es por todos sabido que México, en su carácter de miembro fundador de nuestra organización, se opuso en la Conferencia de San Francisco a esta prerrogativa. Pero es también igualmente sabido que el contexto histórico del momento no dio opción para evitar su incorporación a la Carta. Sin embargo, nuestra decisión de aceptar el veto estuvo y está fundamentada en ese principio de uso responsable del veto. Ejemplo de ello es la iniciativa que hemos impulsado desde hace varios años de manera conjunta con Francia respecto de la restricción voluntaria del veto cuando el Consejo de Seguridad esté frente a situaciones de atrocidades masivas. Dicha iniciativa cuenta hoy con 105 estados signatarios y queremos aprovechar este espacio hoy para invitar a todos los estados que aún no lo han hecho y que han apoyado la resolución que acabamos de adoptar a respaldar también la iniciativa franco-mexicana en el entendido de que ambas son complementarias y se refuerzan mutuamente. Por todos estos motivos, México también formó parte del grupo núcleo del que surgió la iniciativa que hoy nos convoca y con honda convicción ha sido copatrocinador de esta resolución. Hemos logrado, en suma, señor presidente, que el veto no tenga la última palabra. La palabra está de nuevo en la Asamblea General, expresión por excelencia de la conciencia universal. Muchas gracias.
I thank the distinguished representative of Mexico. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Bulgaria.
Mr. President, I would like to start by congratulating us all on the adoption of the resolution standing mandate for a General Assembly debate when a veto is cast in the Security Council, and to especially thank Liechtenstein for the outstanding leadership. With this resolution, we have just contributed to strengthening not only the role of the General Assembly, but also to the effectiveness of the United Nations as a whole. Through Article 24(1) of the United Nations Charter, the member states of the United Nations have conferred on the Security Council primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, and have agreed that in carrying out its duties under their responsibility, the Security Council will act on their behalf, meaning on our behalf. The use of veto, however, has been the cause of the increasing inability of the Security Council to carry out those responsibilities and to act on our behalf in instances of serious threats to and breaches of international peace and security. Instances such as Syria, climate and security, and most recently the illegal, unprovoked and unjustified military aggression against Ukraine have made the need for this resolution all the more important. When the Security Council fails to act, it is not a failure of the Security Council. It is perceived as a failure of the United Nations and of us all. The resolution just adopted provides us with the opportunity to hold any Security Council member who has cast a veto more accountable as to the reasons why it has chosen to prevent the Security Council from acting. Bulgaria is proud to be amongst the initial co-sponsors of this resolution, as we are convinced that it empowers us all to be more responsible members of the United Nations, and that it strengthens multilateralism and international rules-based order. It is my hope that the procedures outlined in this resolution will not have to be activated ever, and that the Security Council will be able to effectively exercise its primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. But from now on, should this not be the case, all of us, through the General Assembly, will be able to seek explanation and not just be mere spectators. And this makes for a more accountable and more effective United Nations. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Bulgaria. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Canada.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President.
En tant que coparent, je voudrais remercier le Liechtenstein et l'ambassadeur Benavesser du Liechtenstein pour son travail inlassable pendant plus de 2 ans sur cette initiative si importante. Cela témoigne de la contribution essentielle de tous les membres au travail efficace de l'ONU. Monsieur le Président, l'Assemblée générale s'est exprimée aujourd'hui avec autorité. On n'a pas eu de vote, mais ça représente un consensus profond qui reflète l'attente que nous, membres de l'Assemblée générale, nous avons envers le Conseil de sécurité qui agit en notre nom pour maintenir la paix et la sécurité internationale. Nous attendons plus en mieux. Et nous l'avons fait savoir très clairement aujourd'hui. Mr. President, I'm not sure what I can say about the veto that will be more eloquent than what has been said by my colleague from Mexico, who I congratulate on his description of the problem, as well as statements by my colleague from Costa Rica and from Turkey. But I just want to add this point, that the veto power that is held by the 5 permanent members of the Security Council is as anachronistic as it is undemocratic. It has prevented the Security Council from doing its job. I couldn't disagree more with the delegate from Russia when he said that he believed that it was the veto which allows the Security Council to do its job. It does not. It prevents the Security Council from doing its job. The recent deadlock over Ukraine has happened at precisely the moment when the world needs the United Nations, and that includes the Security Council, the most. The use and threat of the veto in situations where atrocity crimes are being perpetrated in Syria and Myanmar and Mariupol, for example, or in situations where a permanent member of the Security Council has launched a war of aggression against another UN member state, as the Russian Federation is now doing in Ukraine, are not only shameful, they are also contrary to obligations under the UN Charter and to international law, and to our commitment to the responsibility to protect principle, which was endorsed not only by the General Assembly, but also by the Security Council. Even veto-wielding permanent members of the Security Council are not above the law. None of us is above the law. No one is above the law. The law is above all of us. So it is both right and necessary that the General Assembly will now convene a debate whenever a veto is cast at the Security Council. And may I say that the permanent members of the Security Council have no one to blame but themselves and their own conduct for the fact that the General Assembly now feels obliged to do this. The General Assembly itself has a say in the maintenance of international peace and security. Together with the rest of the UN organization, we have an obligation as a General Assembly to step up when the Security Council has actually sidelined itself. As the International Court of Justice has ruled, the Security Council's primary role, in quotation marks, does not mean that it has an exclusive role. And this is precisely why this resolution adopted today can help us achieve something that is very, very important, and that is a United Nations that is actually less exclusive. A place where the voices of all 193 members of the General Assembly will now be heard when a veto is cast at the Security Council. This is an important moment, a necessary moment for transparency, for fairness, and for equality at the United Nations. We have now learned, sadly, because we can see it happening in real time, we all watched it happen in the most recent example of its use over the unprovoked aggression against a member of this assembly, Ukraine, by the Russian Federation. We know that the use of the veto can, in fact, end up sidelining the Security Council. But it cannot sideline or deadlock the entire United Nations. We have to show an ability to be nimble, to innovate, and to change. When something is broken and refuses to fix itself, we need to show that we have a capacity for collective action. No member state has the right to inflict chaos or paralysis on the entire world, or on the United Nations, or on the General Assembly. Now, we all know that there is, at the heart of the UN, a charter which has an inherent imbalance. As George Orwell might have put it, and I would commend to all members, if you have not been reading Orwell lately, read him now, because he has a lot to teach us and a lot to tell us. He might have put it this way if he was watching us. He would say, well, I guess all member states are equal, but some members are more equal than others. That's the dilemma of the Charter. What Article 2 giveth, Article 27 taketh away. And that's the problem and the dilemma that we've been dealing with since 1945. We may not be able to get rid of this imbalance entirely because, as we all know, the permanent members themselves have a veto over reform of the Charter. But we should nevertheless still try to achieve the abolition of the veto. It should be our objective. But until that happens, we have to continue to take steps, as we have today, of further circumscribing, defining, and limiting the use of the veto, or at least raising the cost of its use, especially in those situations where global peace and security are at stake, or where mass atrocity crimes may be threatened or are being committed. Mr. President, we're having this debate and discussion on the same time, in real time, as we are watching on television or on our iPhones or however we get our information. We're watching the destruction of cities. We're watching the killing of women and children. We're seeing the destruction of an entire infrastructure of a country, and we're seeing a country fight back. The Security Council may not be able to act. That doesn't prevent us from having an ability to act. The world is watching, and the world is expecting us to act, and so act we must. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Canada. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Japan.
Japan welcomed the adoption of this resolution by consensus, which we consider to be a step forward in enhancing the role of the General Assembly and thereby strengthening the United Nations. The recent veto by Russia made the United Nations look as if it were something irrelevant, but it is not. The Security Council, like the United Nations as a whole, is far from flawless. However, pending a reform of the Security Council, we have to make use of it. And this resolution can be a good tool to that end. Japan commends Liechtenstein for its tireless work and is honored to co-sponsor the resolution. From now on, vetoes cannot go without explanation to the entire United Nations membership in General Assembly meetings to be convened either under this resolution or under the Uniting for Peace resolution. The permanent members of the Security Council could also embrace this resolution and recognize that they must face a higher level of accountability commensurate with their heavier responsibilities. Mr. President, Japan also supports several other important veto-related initiatives, such as the French-Mexican political declaration on suspension of veto powers in case of mass atrocities, as well as the Code of Conduct proposed by the Accountability, Coherence, and Transparency Group. But Japan believes we must go even further to make the United Nations more effective. We should advance the discussion on the reform of the Security Council in the intergovernmental negotiation. Indeed, Japan is happy to engage with member states on any ideas to strengthen the United Nations. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Japan. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United States.
Mr. President, the United States knows that the veto is controversial. It was controversial from the very beginning, with heated debates on the veto when the UN Charter was negotiated in San Francisco in 1945. The veto has continued to be controversial until this day, which is the reason the topic remains front and center at the UN, as we are hearing in this debate, and in the broader public debate. The United States takes its responsibilities as a permanent member of the Security Council very seriously. In Article 24 of the UN Charter, the UN member states conferred on the Security Council the primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security. By granting to each of the permanent members of the Council the ability to prevent the adoption of a resolution, the UN Charter entrusted them with a somber and a solemn duty. There are times when a P5 member will conclude that a particular resolution will not advance international peace and security, and it is within the authority granted by the UN Charter for that member to veto that resolution. I agree, however, with my Mexican colleague. Such authority comes with enormous responsibility, and it must be used wisely, judiciously, in accordance with the purposes and the principles of the United Nations, and with full consideration of the advancement of international peace and security. At the very least, when a P5 member casts a veto, that member should be prepared to explain why the resolution at issue would not have furthered the maintenance of international peace and security. Therefore, the United States sees the virtue of automatically convening a General Assembly meeting when a veto is cast. We agree that the matter should be formally debated in the General Assembly, and we believe the P5 member who casts a veto should be given the opportunity to explain its decision to the full GA membership in this very chamber. We note the provision in the resolution that was adopted today that there would be no General Assembly meeting convened on the casting of a veto if the General Assembly had already met on the same situation at a meeting of an emergency special session. Whether the General Assembly convenes an emergency special session or another meeting, we support this forum discussing the matter and would be willing to participate if it is the United States casting a veto. We also note that it is clear that not every no vote cast by a permanent 5 member is a veto. Rather, a veto is a no vote that prevents the adoption of a resolution that would otherwise have been adopted due to it having received 9 or more yes votes. Mr. President, like we have heard from many others in this chamber, we are deeply concerned about the abuse of the right to veto conferred on the P5 members. In particular, we are extraordinarily troubled by Russia's pattern of abusing its veto right over the past decade. It's a long and shameful list. The Russian Federation has vetoed resolutions seeking accountability in Syria, including resolutions that would have continued the mandate of the Joint Investigative Mechanism on Chemical Weapons. Russia has vetoed a resolution referring the Syria situation to the International Criminal Court. It has vetoed a resolution that would have established a criminal tribunal on the downing of flight MH17 over Ukraine. And it vetoed a resolution when Russia attempted to illegally annex Crimea. And recently, most outrageously, the Russian Federation has vetoed a Security Council resolution deploring its aggression against Ukraine, deciding that the use of force should end, and deciding on the withdrawal of all Russian forces from the internationally recognized borders of Ukraine. In short, Russia egregiously violated the UN Charter and then blocked the effort by the UN Security Council to address the situation. We agree. The veto was not intended as a carte blanche for impunity for the P5. It was not meant to confer automatic protection from accountability in perpetuity. By abusing the veto, by preventing the international community from holding Russia to account, Russia has diminished the role and the reputation of the UN Security Council. It has undermined the UN Charter, and it has tarnished the UN as a whole. We welcome this resolution, Mr. President, as a step towards placing greater attention on the appropriate use of the veto, the solemn responsibilities of the P5 members, and the primary role of the Security Council to maintain international peace and security. For all of the above reasons, the United States was pleased to co-sponsor this resolution. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United States. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Qatar.
شكرا لكم السيد الرئيس. يرحب وفد دولة قطر باعتماد الجمعية العامة للقرار المعنون إنشاء ولاية دائمة لإجراء مناقشة الجمعية العامة عندما يستخدم الفيتو في مجلس الأمن. وقد كان من دواعي سرورنا المشاركة ضمن المجموعة الأساسية للدول المقدمة لمشروع القرار منذ أن تم عرض هذه المبادرة قبل عامين، حيث أننا نعتقد بأن الوقت قد حان بالفعل لأن تتخذ الجمعية العامة هذه الخطوة الهامة لتعزيز الدور المنوط بها وفق ميثاق الأمم المتحدة. وهذه الخطوة تحظى بقبول واسع لدى الدول الأعضاء كما يتضح ذلك من العدد الكبير من الوفود التي دعمت مشروع القرار. ونغتنم هذه الفرصة لنعبر عن التقدير لإمارة ليشتنشتاين وباقي الشركاء في تقديم هذه المبادرة الذي حرصنا بالتنسيق معهم على التشاور بشكل مكثف مع سائر الدول الأعضاء، وأن تكون العملية شفافة وشاملة بالنظر لأهمية موضوع القرار وطبيعته الشاملة. لقد كان دافع دولة قطر في دعم هذه المبادرة التزامها اتجاه مبدأ تعددية الأطراف وإيمانها بأهمية ومركزية دور الجمعية العامة بوصفها الهيئة التمثيلية الأشمل في الأمم المتحدة. ونعتقد أن القرار الذي اعتمد اليوم بتوافق الآراء يساهم في تعزيز دور الجمعية العامة في إطار الولاية المنوطة بها وفق ميثاق الأمم المتحدة. فالميثاق يمنح الجمعية العامة اختصاصا في المسائل المتعلقة بالحفاظ على السلم والأمن الدوليين. وكما يتضح ذلك في ديباجة القرار فإنه ينطلق بالكلية من مبادئ وأغراض الميثاق وأحكامه خاصة المواد 10 و12 و24 و27. سيد الرئيس، كما أن القرار لا يمس بعملية المفاوضات الحكومية الدولية بشأن إصلاح مجلس الأمن فيما يتعلق بمسألة حق النقد، ولا يستبق ما ستوصل إليه تلك العملية بخصوص استخدام حق النقد بحد ذاته. سيد الرئيس، ختاما نأمل بأن يكون هذا القرار التاريخي خطوة هامة نحو تعزيز قيام هذه المنظمة الدولية بالغرض الأساسي الذي أنشئت من أجله، وهو تعزيز حفظ السلم والأمن الدوليين خاصة في الحالات التي من غير المقبول أن تلتزم فيها الأمم المتحدة موقف المتفرج، بل تتطلب استجابة فاعلة. وشكرا لكم السيد الرئيس.
I thank the distinguished representative of Qatar. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Switzerland.
Monsieur le Président, la Suisse se félicite de l'adoption de cette résolution qu'elle a co-parrainée avec plus de 80 États membres. Et nous voulons remercier le Liechtenstein pour son leadership et le travail précieux et dur pendant les 2 dernières années. L'actualité nous démontre qu'il est indispensable que les organes principaux des Nations Unies travaillent ensemble de façon complémentaire pour garantir un multilatéralisme efficace et effectif. Si l'un ne peut pas agir, l'autre peut et doit entrer en jeu. Cette résolution souligne le rôle de cette Assemblée comme organe représentatif et inclusif des Nations Unies, y compris en matière de paix et de sécurité internationale. Elle reflète fidèlement les responsabilités et les compétences des principaux organes de l'ONU tels que définis par la Charte. Nous soutenons donc le mandat permanent créé par la présente résolution pour un débat de l'Assemblée Générale en cas de veto au Conseil de sécurité, tout en espérant que cela se produira le moins possible. Avec nos partenaires, nous nous engageons depuis près de 20 ans en faveur d'un Conseil de sécurité plus transparent et plus efficace. Le plaidoyer pour un usage plus responsable et plus restrictif du droit de veto est un élément clé de ce travail, y compris à travers le groupe ACT, Accountability, Coherence and Transparency, coordonné par la Suisse. Dans le cadre du code de conduite promu par ce groupe, nous soutenons les efforts visant à encourager les membres permanents à renoncer à l'exercice de leur droit de veto, notamment dans les cas de génocide, de crimes contre l'humanité ou de crimes de guerre. Nous voyons dans cette résolution un appel supplémentaire à restreindre l'usage du veto, car elle renforce la responsabilité et la transparence lorsqu'un membre permanent du Conseil en fait usage. Le mécanisme instauré par cette résolution ne modifie en rien l'obligation de rechercher la convergence des positions, d'aborder les points de vue divergents et d'œuvrer de bonne foi au consensus au sein du Conseil de sécurité. Un message fort et uni du Conseil de sécurité est crucial pour maintenir la paix et la sécurité internationale lorsqu'il s'agit d'appeler toutes les parties à respecter le droit international, à protéger les civils et à garantir un accès sûr et sans entrave aux acteurs et actrices humanitaires. Le Conseil de sécurité doit également insister avec une seule voix au règlement pacifique des différends et au dialogue. En tant que candidate au Conseil de sécurité, la Suisse restera pleinement engagée en faveur du dialogue et de la résolution pacifique des conflits. Monsieur le Président, l'engagement de la Suisse aux Nations Unies est guidé par la ferme conviction que le multilatéralisme nous offre la meilleure voie pour un avenir plus sûr et une planète plus durable. Nous, États membres, sommes constamment appelés à renforcer, améliorer et revitaliser les structures qui nous permettent de nous atteler ensemble aux problèmes urgents de notre temps. Il y a un sentiment que le multilatéralisme est en jeu et nous devons faire mieux pour le renforcer. Aujourd'hui, nous avons saisi l'occasion de faire un pas en avant. Je vous remercie.
I thank the distinguished representative of Switzerland. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, the founding members of the United Nations vowed to save generations that followed them from the scourge of war. They conferred the primary responsibility for maintaining international peace and security on the Security Council. The UN Charter, in giving that solemn duty, gives the permanent members the power of veto. This is a heavy responsibility to be used in the interests of securing the peace and security that people around the world seek, and the UN was established to provide. It is not to be used lightly, and should not, we believe, be used without accountability. It should not prevent the Council from fulfilling its mandate, which is why we have voted in favour of the resolution today. Russia used its veto 17 times since 2011 to block the Council's efforts to protect the Syrian people. Russia used their veto to prevent the Council from taking action in response to their illegal and unprovoked war in Ukraine. Russia has done this in isolation from other Council members, reflecting the lack of international support. Therefore, the United Kingdom welcomes the call for member states who hold a permanent seat on the Security Council to explain their use of veto to the General Assembly. For our part, the United Kingdom has not exercised our veto since 1989. We listen carefully and negotiate on the Security Council to try and find agreement. We prefer to win votes rather than use our veto to block Council action. The UK is a signatory to the Accountability, Coherency and Transparency Group Code of Conduct, where we have pledged not to vote against any credible draft resolution intended to prevent or halt mass atrocities. By adopting this resolution today, we take a step in pursuit of upholding international peace and security, which is what the UN is here to do. And I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United Kingdom. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Poland.
Mr. President, Poland is proud to be among the main sponsors of the veto initiative resolution and welcomes its today's adoption, which shall be considered as an important step towards the strengthening the entire UN system by stopping the abuse of the veto power. The resolution on veto initiative will contribute to enhancing the role of the General Assembly and multilateralism, increasing transparency and decision-making process within the Security Council, and thus making the entire UN system more democratic and credible. It empowers us all as United Nations. This resolution is a positive attempt to respond to the excessive use of the veto power, which is negatively perceived in the eyes of the international public opinion. The members of the Security Council were entrusted by the UN member states with the power of veto to have a bigger responsibilities as guardians of the UN Charter. This resolution underlines that the veto power must be regarded as a responsibility, not a privilege, by all permanent members of the Security Council. The initiative that led us to the adoption of today's resolution has started several years ago and was not meant as a reply to the current setting. But given the peace and security situation in Eastern Europe, such a reaction of the international community is timely and pertinent. The Russian aggression against Ukraine illustrates how the capabilities of the Security Council can be impaired in cases when swift and decisive actions are needed. A situation when one of the Security Council permanent members, which is responsible for violating the international peace, uses veto to evade responsibility for its wrongdoings and continue to enjoy impunity, is simply unacceptable by the societies that we represent. In light of this, today is a very important day for the UN membership, and it constitutes another significant step towards greater democratization of our organization, as well as strengthening of the multilateralism and contributing to the international peace and stability. And I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Poland. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Guatemala.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente, por darme la palabra.
Very much for giving me the floor,
no
Mr.
dudó
President.
en sumarse
Guatemala did not hesitate in joining as a co-sponsor of the draft resolution A/76/L52, standing mandate for a General Assembly debate when a veto is cast in the Security Council. Considering that the maintenance of international peace and security is the primary responsibility of the Security Council, and by the same token, any Security Council decision or failure to act has global consequences and impact. We have seen how in the past, on several occasions, and more recently, the use of the veto has prevented the Security Council from addressing real situations related to threats to international peace and security. We, as member states of the United Nations, entrusted the Security Council with the primary responsibility for maintaining international peace and security, recognizing that the Council acts on behalf of all members in accordance with the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter. Therefore, the decisions and resolutions adopted, and even those initiatives that were not adopted, as well as the representation and performance in such and acts in such a high organ are intrinsically related to the high level of responsibility that comes with being a member of the Security Council and representing all members. Mr. President, we believe that the resolution adopted is a transparency mechanism that will provide the General Assembly with the opportunity to take up issues that the Security Council has not considered fully as part of its responsibilities when the vote has been used. We thank the delegation of the Principality of Liechtenstein for leading efforts toward adopting this resolution. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Guatemala. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kenya.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the United Nations was created with the primary purpose to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, and to protect the dignity and worth of the human person as well as their fundamental human rights. Under Articles 24 and 25 of the Charter, Member States conferred the Security Council with the primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, and further agreed to accept and carry out the decisions of the Security Council in accordance with the Charter. In similar fashion, the International Court of Justice has determined that the powers and functions of the General Assembly include the general competence of the Assembly to consider questions relating to the maintenance of international peace and security. My delegation is of the considered view that in all situations where a threat or breach of international peace and security arises, members of the Security Council, including the permanent members, must act responsibly to stop or prevent such threat or breach from occurring or continuing. This responsibility is especially important when an armed conflict or act of aggression involves crimes of mass atrocities. At the World Summit in 2005, member states of the United Nations expressed further their readiness to take collective action in a timely and decisive manner through the Security Council in accordance with the Charter, end of quote, whenever there was a need to protect populations from acts of mass atrocities. Kenya is of the considered view that the Security Council should not be prevented from acting responsibly as a result of the exercise of veto power when effective measures are needed for the maintenance of international peace and security. We further believe that the adherence to this initiative would enhance the ability of the United Nations to live up to its primary purpose, and I quote, to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, end of quote. For these reasons, Kenya supports this initiative and has voted in favor of the present resolution. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Kenya. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of New Zealand.
New Zealand welcomes the adoption of the resolution standing mandate for a General Assembly debate when a veto is cast in the Security Council. New Zealand actively supported this initiative from its inception, and we are a proud member of the core group. We did so steadfast in our belief that the General Assembly has a legitimate interest in and political responsibility to address situations where the use of the veto has resulted in paralysis in the Security Council's decision-making responsibilities. As has been noted by so many others already this morning, the use of the veto is a privilege which comes with profound responsibility. Its arbitrary use in the pursuit of national interest rather than in the advancement of international peace and security contributes to poor decision-making. The casting of the veto by a single member or small number of members stymies the majority of the Council from carrying out its functions on behalf of the wider UN membership. As a result of Security Council inaction, responsible states, often the neighbouring states, have frequently been left a heavy burden that should have been shared more evenly by the wider international community. The veto is the most undemocratic element of the UN. It is arguably the single greatest source of criticism of the UN by the communities we serve. New Zealand has been a vocal opponent of the use of the veto since its inception in 1945. This remains unchanged. We have witnessed amazing support from across the UN membership this morning. This demonstrates the timeliness and necessity of this initiative. We too commend Liechtenstein and the core group for their thought leadership and their active outreach on this initiative. The resolution adopted this morning provides a mechanism to ensure accountability between UN organs in accordance with the Charter. Ultimately, it is about strengthening inclusive multilateralism and the effectiveness of the UN. In future, if, and as others have said, we hope it is only if, this resolution is activated, it will be important that we, the members of the General Assembly, take advantage of the opportunity afforded by this resolution to exercise our collective political responsibility under the UN Charter to address matters of international peace and security. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of New Zealand. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Australia.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. And can I say at the outset that as Russia's unprovoked, unjust and illegal invasion of Ukraine has painfully illustrated, the international rules-based order underpinning global stability, security and prosperity is under significant strain. Together, we must urgently find ways to ensure the United Nations acts effectively and expeditiously to address complex challenges to our collective peace and security. Colleagues, as a core group member, Australia was very pleased to join more than 80 other states in co-sponsoring this important resolution establishing a standing mandate for a General Assembly debate when a veto is cast in the Security Council. Every year since the UN's founding, the equity and effectiveness of the veto has been the subject of intense debate, and rightly so. Too often we see the veto considered by some permanent members to be an unimpeachable right, rather than a solemn responsibility. Too often we're told that the General Assembly, despite being the most representative UN organ, has no responsibility for international peace and security, that the views of this body, regardless of the number of countries represented, don't carry weight. Well, Mr. President, in fact, the UN Charter is clear. While the membership has conferred upon the Security Council the primary responsibility for the maintenance of international peace and security, the Charter does not preclude the General Assembly from debate and deliberation when the Council is unable to act on behalf of the wider membership. It is this responsibility that brings us here today. Mr. President, Australia led opposition to the establishment of the veto at the San Francisco Conference. Since that time, we have consistently called for better standards governing its use, specifically that the use of the veto be both limited and transparent. To this end, we remain steadfast supporters of efforts to limit the use of the veto, particularly in situations of mass atrocity, and encourage all delegations to commit to the Accountability, Coherence and Transparency Code of Conduct and the French-Mexico Initiative. Mr. President, we consider today's resolution distinct from but complementary to these efforts. The resolution does not seek to directly limit or curb the use of the veto. Rather, it's an important and long overdue step towards bringing greater transparency and accountability to the use of the veto. By providing an open and transparent forum for the veto user to explain its veto and a platform for all member states to express their views, we believe it will help strengthen Council deliberations and decisions over the long term. Mr. President, colleagues, in closing, can I say we very much welcome the overwhelming support for this resolution and express our sincere thanks to the permanent representative and the permanent mission of Liechtenstein for their leadership on this important initiative over the course of more than 2 years. Mr. President, colleagues, we can say that today was a very good day at the office. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Australia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Singapore.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Singapore co-sponsored and actively supported the draft resolution to create a standing mandate for the General Assembly to hold a debate whenever a veto is cast in the Security Council. We are pleased to note that more than 80 countries joined as co-sponsors, and we welcome the adoption of this resolution by consensus. Singapore has always taken a clear and consistent position that greater transparency and accountability in the work of the Security Council will improve the Council's credibility and the legitimacy of its decisions. This will in turn strengthen the legitimacy and credibility of the United Nations as a whole and of the multilateral system. We supported this resolution because it establishes a mechanism to ensure greater transparency and accountability every time a veto is cast by any permanent member. Singapore recognizes the right of permanent members to use their veto power granted by the UN Charter. This resolution does not question or limit that right. However, casting a veto is a decision with major implications. Once taken, we believe that it is the responsibility of a permanent member to explain its decision to the General Assembly. We also believe that it is important for the permanent member that has cast the veto to hear the views of the members of the General Assembly, including the views of small states who often do not have a voice on such matters. This resolution will therefore strengthen the General Assembly and enhance its cooperation with the Security Council. Mr. President, this resolution will also provide a direct mechanism for the General Assembly to take a stand on critical issues of international peace and security where the Security Council is unable to act because of a lack of agreement among the permanent members. This will help to enhance the credibility of the United Nations. The adoption today of this resolution without a vote is an indication that there is overwhelming support for greater transparency and accountability on the use of the veto. This resolution is not only timely, it is also a substantive and meaningful contribution to the work of the United Nations. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Singapore. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ireland.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Ireland is proud, very proud, to have been a member from the outset of the core group of states led by Liechtenstein, who proposed this historic resolution today. For too long, the veto has left us with the Security Council that is unable to take action in the face of some of the most pressing challenges facing our world today, from the impact of climate change on conflict and security to Russia's aggression in Ukraine. We have all seen, and Ireland has witnessed firsthand during our term as an elected member, how the abuse of the veto has undermined the spirit of cooperation intended by the UN Charter, with any one permanent member state being in a position to override the will of the majority of Council members. The adoption by consensus of this resolution this morning, supported by such a significant cross-regional group of co-sponsors, shows how important this matter is to the UN membership as a whole. The success of today's resolution means that the General Assembly and the wider UN membership have been given a voice when the Security Council is silenced. It recognises that the use of the veto is not just a matter of concern to those sitting in the Council chamber, but to all members of the United Nations. Ireland has long viewed the veto as an outdated instrument designed for an outdated version of the world. We have consistently called for its abolition. Though this resolution does not prevent the use of the veto, it will mean that states wielding the veto will now need to defend their actions to the wider membership. Those who block the Security Council's essential work will be held to account here in the General Assembly. President, in conclusion, I want to thank Liechtenstein for its tireless work, and a big thanks to all those states who supported this vital, historic initiative in the lead up to today. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Ireland. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kuwait.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. أود في البداية أن نعرف لكم عن شكرنا على عقد هذه الجلسة الهامة للجمعية العامة المتحدة حول مبادرة مبتكرة شهدت ولادتها قبل ما يقارب 3 سنوات. قد تم ترجمتها اليوم إلى قرار للجمعية العامة المتحدة. ونرحب بهذا الصدد باعتماد هذا القرار الفريد الذي يقرر عقد مناقشة للجمعية العامة المتحدة خلال 10 أيام من قيام عضو دائم في مجلس الأمن باستخدام حق النقد الفيتو. واغتنم هذه المناسبة
debate 10 days after the casting of a veto. I would like to express our gratitude to the Permanent Representative of Liechtenstein, Ambassador Christian Weinsauer, and his team for the way they have managed this initiative, which resulted in the official adoption of the resolution today at the General Assembly. Kuwait has always supported this initiative since its inception, and we were a power of the core team of the core group. It is our conviction that this resolution adds greatly to the work of the General Assembly. As an Arab state country which has suffered for decades from the use of the veto in the Security Council, and as a former member of the Security Council in 2018-2019, a period during which we saw the veto used 9 times by 3 prominent members to oppose 6 draft resolutions. We are perfectly aware of the impact of the use of the veto has, and we're convinced that this resolution today will strengthen the role of the General Assembly and will contribute towards the strengthening of transparency and accountability in the relationship between the 2 major organs of the United Nations, the General Assembly and the Security Council, that is. Mr. President, when this right, this privilege is used, the members casting the veto should be in a position to justify their casting of the veto in front of the entire General Assembly. This will also allow member states to comment upon the use of the veto and explain their viewpoint as regards the casting of the veto. It's totally natural that there will always be those who are opposed to that and those who are using the veto. And this resolution of ours will guarantee that there will be a transparent and constructive debate on this, which will enable us to exchange viewpoints and listen to various opinions. The arbitrary use of the right to veto by some prominent members in many a case has contributed to undermining the decision-making process in the Security Council, and in certain cases this has made the Security Council incapable of shouldering its responsibility and led to frustration amongst the peoples of the world, given the incapacity of the Security Council to take the measures which are necessary to maintain international peace and security. We're convinced that the right to veto is an exceptional and rare privilege that only 5 states in the world have had since 1945, and this is first and foremost a responsibility. By way of concluding, Mr. President, and because our meeting today coincides with the International Day of Multilateralism and Peace Diplomacy. I would like to reiterate our conviction, our commitment to the multilateral system, our support to any and all measure that aims to strengthen and consolidate it. The state of Kuwait is of the view that the resolution we adopted today will help preserve and strengthen multilateralism, the effectiveness of our organization in line with the United Nations Charter. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Kuwait. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Malta.
Mr. President, Malta proudly joins today's vote as a member of the core group promoting the resolution entitled Standing Mandate for a General Assembly Debate when a veto is cast in the Security Council. Malta is honored to have formed part of the core group led by Liechtenstein since the origin of this initiative 2 years ago, and is pleased to see it adopted by acclamation today. Malta is pleased to see that the voice of the international community stands with reason, with rationality, and with relevance to today's current global realities. Today, the international community has spoken. We will now have a General Assembly which is stronger and its role further enhanced vis-à-vis the Security Council. Mr. President, we now have a resolution which will seek to request a debate of the General Assembly within 10 working days since the casting of a veto in the Security Council. This debate will be called upon in a manner which will see the wider UN membership express its position on the use of such a veto, a mechanism which is not just a privilege, but a conscientious responsibility to those that hold it. The initiative, which now sees 83 co-sponsors, is a mechanism which will solidify our cause for further harmonization between the two major organs of the United Nations, the General Assembly and the Security Council, as well as more transparency, accountability, and relevance on veto use to the wider UN membership. In this manner, the view of the majority will be heard, and this is what we are doing exactly today with a strong number of delegations in favor, and therefore in favor of multilateralism. Calling a debate of and by the General Assembly to discuss veto use is not calling a change to the use of the veto. That discussion is not in the purview of this resolution. Instead, it remains in the hands of another important process, known as the reform of the Security Council, and therefore fundamentally crucial to our overall pleas for reform and revitalization of the United Nations as a whole. On the other hand, this initiative is driven by our passion in the democratic principles of the United Nations, especially the General Assembly. Formed organically by the belief and inspiration of multilateralism, the core group that has initiated this resolution is as cross-regional as you can get, a mix of Latin American, European, Arab, and SIDS. Our group is a reflection of how strong the initiative is, which goes beyond borders and national interests. The voice of all of us is multiplied twofold with this initiative, because by addressing the use of a recent veto in the General Assembly, one is also addressing matters that pertain to those members and regions which are traditionally underrepresented on the Security Council. To conclude, we look forward to the resolution's next steps. By joining today's vote, the international community has joined a noble, meaningful cause of taking effective stances and action against threats to international peace and security. The UN Charter is clear. The Security Council is there to work on behalf of the membership, and when it's prevented from doing so, the international community should be given the tools to discuss this, and that can now be done thanks to this resolution. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Malta. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Austria.
Thank you, Mr. President. And we've heard many wise words today regarding the right of the veto in the UN Security Council, notably from Mexico, Canada, Singapore, Malta just now, many, many more. This permits me to be brief. Indeed, the veto is an anachronism from a time long past that creates an undemocratic inequality in the UN. And yes, the veto is part of the system of the UN Charter that we signed up to and that we respect. But to warrant our respect, the right to veto must be used with responsibility and with the intent to further peace. The practice in the Security Council has not always lived up to this standard, and recently we were disappointed by Russia's use of the veto on the situation in Ukraine. Therefore, Austria welcomes this initiative under Liechtenstein leadership and co-sponsored the resolution as a contribution to strengthening the effectiveness of the Security Council and enhancing the role of the General Assembly when it comes to maintenance of international peace and security. We also support other proposals like the French-Mexican initiative on veto restraint in case of mass atrocities, as well as the ACT Code of Conduct not to vote against any resolution intended to end mass atrocities. This resolution today strengthens the role of the General Assembly and therefore of the whole UN membership in the area of peace and security. In no way does it restrict the permanent members' veto right or the competence of the Security Council with regard to maintenance of international peace and security. The additional references in the resolution, which were included in response to the feedback provided by Member States last week's consultations, reflect the intention and stress the compatibility with the division of competences foreseen in the UN Charter. All Member States have an obligation to uphold UN principles. Therefore, and in line with the UN Charter, we support that the General Assembly will automatically be convened to hold a debate on the situation when a veto is cast in the Council. The UN cannot remain inactive when the Security Council does not fulfill its task of upholding international peace. Austria therefore commends this resolution as a positive advancement of the UN system and thanks Liechtenstein for all the efforts in this respect. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Austria. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Ukraine.
President. Mr. President, Ukraine is proud to be among main sponsors of the resolution adopted today. This resolution is of particular relevance and importance for Ukraine and other member states who uphold the UN Charter and its principles. The mechanism adopted today is clear and transparent. It's not politicized or selective. It will be invoked automatically each time when the Security Council is paralyzed by veto. Permanent members of the Security Council have an extraordinary power granted to them under the UN Charter. It's not a privilege, but responsibility. In recent years, veto was used while ongoing aggression or atrocity crimes were being committed. Such vetoes prevented condemnation of these crimes, investigation and prosecution, as well as other required measures. There is no indication in the drafting history of the UN Charter that the veto power was supposed to be used in this way. Mr. President, let me remind that almost every draft resolution in the Security Council on the Russian aggression against Ukraine was blocked. It happened due to the abuse of veto by the country which occupies the Soviet seat in the Security Council, the Russian Federation. The most recent case happened 2 months ago when Russia vetoed a draft in response to its full-scale invasion in Ukraine. Can we consider the use of veto in such cases as demonstration of responsibility? It's rather a rhetoric question. That's why Ukraine has supported this resolution and continues to support other existing initiatives aimed at limiting the use of veto and strengthening their responsibility for its cost. Mr. President, let me reiterate that permanent members of the Council who are responsibly carrying out their duty of maintaining international peace and security should have no problems with committing themselves to these and other respective initiatives. Moreover, the UN Charter imposes obligations on the Security Council to act in accordance with the purposes and principles. Unfortunately, too often in the recent history, the abuse of the veto right undermined the Council's ability to respond to challenges to the international peace and security, proving to the need to address the current mechanism in order to make it more efficient and credible. Every veto with respect to crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide is a manifestation of utmost disregard for those who have been killed and injured, and as well as for those who could be killed. Killed in particular because Russia considers the veto as a green light for such crimes. We are also convinced that the use of the veto should be restricted when a permanent member is directly involved in a conflict under consideration of the Council. Today's adoption reconfirms that while the UN membership is not going to further tolerate the abuse of veto and seek the strengthening of accountability. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Ukraine. We have heard the last speaker for this meeting. We shall hear the remaining speakers this afternoon in this hall at 3 p.m. The meeting is adjourned.